48 hours later, the heavy, suffocating humidity of the Atlanta evening clung to the glass doors of the Grand Hotel. It was the night of the annual Legacy Gala, an exclusive invite-only event where the most elite members of our high society church gathered to flaunt their wealth and pretend their family closets were free of skeletons. I stepped out of my car and handed the keys to the valet, taking a deep breath of the thick southern air. I was wearing a stunning emerald green silk gown that cascaded perfectly down to the floor, hugging my frame in a way that commanded quiet attention. For the past decade, I had intentionally avoided these suffocating social events, completely disgusted by the fake smiles and shallow conversations. But tonight, I had a very specific reason for being here. Walking into the massive ballroom felt exactly like stepping into a beautifully decorated lion den. Massive crystal chandeliers threw fractured shimmering light across dozens of round tables covered in flawless white satin and heavy floral centerpieces. The room was buzzing with the hushed voices of local politicians, wealthy doctors, and corporate lawyers who had built their entire identities around their social standing within this congregation. Almost immediately, my mother Yvonne spotted me from across the sprawling room. She was wearing a rigid silver dress that perfectly matched her cold and calculating personality. I saw her jaw tighten as she marched aggressively toward me, intercepting my path before I could even greet the host at the entrance. Her eyes scanned my gown top to bottom, desperately searching for a flaw, an out-of-place seam, or a cheap fabric, but finding absolutely none. Her face hardened into a familiar mask of intense disdain. "What on earth are you doing here, Sydney?" she hissed, keeping her voice dangerously low so her wealthy friends standing nearby would not hear the venom dripping from her words. "I explicitly told the event coordinator you were not attending tonight." Before I could even offer an answer, she grabbed my arm with surprising force, her fingernails digging into my skin. She forcefully steered me away from the grand, beautifully lit tables near the front of the stage. "You are not ruining this important night for your sister and her husband," Yvonne muttered through clenched teeth, dragging me past staring guests. She pulled me all the way to the very back of the massive ballroom, pointing a shaking finger at an isolated table. It was a tiny, cramped table shoved directly next to the swinging wooden doors of the hotel kitchen. Every time the waitstaff rushed past carrying trays of food, the smell of industrial dish soap and burnt kitchen grease wafted over the table, completely isolating anyone sitting there. "You sit right here and you stay completely out of sight," Yvonne commanded, her eyes burning with resentment. "Do not embarrass this family in front of the entire congregation." I sat down quietly, smoothing out the luxurious silk of my green dress. I watched from the shadows of the back room as my family took their privileged seats at the head table, completely surrounded by the most influential people in the city of Atlanta. Dominique was practically glowing, leaning affectionately into her white husband Spencer, who was busy shaking hands and acting like the financial savior of the community. My father Reginald sat next to them, looking incredibly proud, completely ignoring the fact that his youngest daughter had just been banished to the kitchen doors. A few minutes later, the heavy chatter in the ballroom began to die down as Spencer proudly tapped his spoon against his crystal champagne glass. He confidently strode up the carpeted steps to the stage and grabbed the microphone from the stand. His smile was blindingly bright, completely fake, and utterly calculated for maximum charm. "Good evening, everyone," Spencer projected, his voice echoing smoothly through the grand speakers mounted on the walls. "Tonight we are here to celebrate family values and the lasting legacy that we build for the next generation. My father-in-law, Reginald, has always taught me that true wealth is not just about the money you keep in your bank account, but what you generously give back to those who desperately depend on you." The entire room erupted into polite, enthusiastic applause. Yvonne wiped a fake tear from her eye, playing the part of the emotional Blessed Mother perfectly for her audience. But then Spencer abruptly stopped clapping. His eyes scanned the massive room, looking over the sea of wealthy guests, until his gaze locked directly onto me, sitting alone in the shadows by the kitchen doors. His charming smile twisted into a cruel, mocking smirk that made my blood run cold. He snapped his fingers loudly, and signaled for a waiter who had been standing at attention by the edge of the stage. The waiter nodded and walked the entire length of the ballroom, carrying a polished silver tray. Everyone in the room turned their heads, watching in total silence, as the waiter stopped exactly at my isolated table and set the tray down right in front of me. On top of the tray was a single piece of paper. It was a medical bill for $25,000. Spencer leaned intimately into the microphone, his voice dropping to a theatrical tone of fake pity. Since Sydney contributes absolutely nothing to this family and its legacy, he announced, his voice dripping with intense condescension, I think it is only fair that she at least tries to pay for Grandma Josephine and her upcoming medical care. The grand ballroom went completely dead silent. The music stopped. The clinking of silverware stopped. Hundreds of elite church members turned their heads simultaneously to stare at me in the back corner. The older women in their expensive jewelry leaned into each other, murmuring their strong disapproval. I could hear the hushed whispers of severe judgment ripping through the wealthy crowd. They were looking at me exactly how my family wanted them to look at me, like I was a parasite, a pathetic college dropout who selfishly leeched off her highly successful relatives. Do something useful with your little information technology salary, Sydney Spencer mocked loudly into the microphone, ensuring every single person heard his insult. He stood on that elevated stage looking so incredibly victorious, believing with absolute certainty that he had completely destroyed my dignity in front of the entire city. I looked down at the massive expensive bill sitting on the silver tray. I did not cry. I did not shrink down or run away in shame. I calmly stood up, pushing my heavy chair back across the carpet. I reached slowly into my designer clutch and pulled out an exclusive American Express Centurion black card. The heavy titanium metal felt cool and solid against my fingers. Without breaking eye contact with Spencer, and without saying a single word, I tossed the heavy black card directly onto the silver tray, letting it hit the metal with a loud, sharp clink that echoed perfectly through the dead silent room. The heavy metallic clink of the black card against the silver tray seemed to echo endlessly across the silent ballroom. For several agonizing seconds, nobody breathed. Hundreds of elite guests simply stared at the small piece of titanium sitting innocently next to the $25,000 medical bill. Up on the stage, Spencer stared down at my table. I watched the confident, arrogant smirk slowly melt off his face, replaced by a sudden flash of genuine confusion. He gripped the microphone tightly. A nervous sweat began to form on his forehead, gleaming under the harsh stage lights. He let out a loud, forced laugh that sounded completely unnatural in the quiet room. Are we supposed to be impressed? Sydney Spencer asked, his voice cracking slightly as he tried to regain his composure. He pointed a shaking finger at the tray and looked out at the audience. It looks like our little computer technician has been digging through her client's desk drawers. I hope whoever you stole that credit card from does not press charges when they find out you took it to a charity gala. A ripple of uncomfortable laughter spread through the front tables. My mother Yvonne immediately seized the opportunity to control the narrative. She stood up from her prime seat next to the stage and turned to the crowd of wealthy church members. I am so sorry, everyone, Yvonne announced loudly, putting a dramatic hand over her heart. My youngest daughter has always had a flair for the theatrical. She likely bought a fake prop card online just to cause a scene. You know how she struggles with reality. Dominique chimed in right on cue, adjusting her diamond necklace. Really, Sydney, she sneered. Stealing from the people whose computers you fix. You are an absolute embarrassment to this family. We try to include you in our social circle, and this is how you repay us. I did not break eye contact with Spencer. I did not raise my voice or defend myself from my mother and sister. I simply pushed my chair back and stood up. The emerald green silk of my gown rustled softly as I stepped away from the kitchen doors. The crowd parted instantly, creating a clear path for me as I walked slowly and deliberately toward the stage. Every single eye in the ballroom followed my movements. I could hear the hushed whispers of the society ladies wondering if security was going to escort me out. I reached the carpeted steps leading up to the stage. Spencer moved to block my path, holding his hand out to stop me, but I did not even slow down. I stepped right past him, easily snatching the microphone from his slick, sweating hand. The speakers let out a brief, sharp whine of feedback, making several guests wince in discomfort. I stood in the direct center of the stage looking down at my family. "I did not steal this card, Spencer," I said, my voice carrying a calm, absolute authority that I had never let them hear before. "And I certainly did not buy a fake prop online, Mom. The reason you all think I am a broke help desk technician is because that is exactly what I allowed you to believe. For 10 years, I let you mock my career choices because your shallow judgment was the perfect cover for what I was actually building." Dominique let out a harsh, disbelieving laugh. "What are you talking about, you delusional freak?" she yelled. "You fix broken laptops." I looked directly at my sister. "I do not fix laptops, Dominique. I am the founder and chief executive officer of Vanguard Cybernetics. We are a top-tier digital forensics and cybersecurity firm. I hold exclusive government contracts and audit the secure servers of Fortune 500 companies. I built an empire while you were all busy gossiping at country club luncheons." The ballroom fell dead silent again. The shock on my mother's face was absolute. Her jaw actually dropped as she tried to process the fact that the daughter she had just banished to the kitchen doors was exponentially wealthier than everyone sitting at her elite head table. Spencer swallowed hard. He took a step backward, pulling nervously at his collar. "You are lying," he stammered, his charming facade completely shattering. "You are just making up garbage to save face." I turned to face him, fully gripping the microphone. "I am not lying, Spencer. But speaking of stealing and making up garbage to save face, I audited your investment bank servers this morning. My team bypassed your firewalls in less than 12 minutes. Spencer froze. All the remaining color drained from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost in an expensive tailored suit. I continued, my voice echoing clearly through the massive room. "Would you care to explain the $4.2 million you secretly wired from my father's corporate logistics accounts to an anonymous shell company in the Cayman Islands last Tuesday? Because according to the digital paper trail I secured, you have been embezzling from this family for months to cover your own massive stock market losses." Loud gasps erupted across the ballroom. The wealthy church members began whispering frantically to one another, pointing at Spencer. Dominique jumped up from her chair, her face twisted in pure rage. "You are a liar!" Sydney Dominique screamed, pointing a manicured finger at me. "My husband is a brilliant investor. You are just jealous of my perfect marriage and my perfect life. You are trying to destroy us because you have nothing." I pulled my phone from my clutch and tapped the screen, mirroring the forensic banking documents directly to the massive projector screens behind the stage. The glowing white screens instantly displayed the offshore wire transfers bearing Spencer's direct digital authorization signature. The evidence was irrefutable. Suddenly, the heavy wooden doors at the back of the ballroom slammed open. My father, Reginald, pushed his way through the crowd of tables. His face was a dark, violent shade of purple. He was breathing heavily, his fists clenched so tightly his knuckles were white. He looked absolutely furious, marching toward the stage with terrifying purpose. I stood my ground, feeling a brief spark of vindication. Finally, my father was seeing the truth. He was going to drag Spencer off this stage for stealing his money and nearly bankrupting his supply chain company. He stormed up the stairs, his heavy dress shoes thudding against the wood. But my father did not look at Spencer. He completely bypassed the white son-in-law who had just stolen over $4 million from his life's work. Reginald marched directly up to me. Before I could even register the absolute hatred in his eyes, he raised his hand and slapped me across the face with all of his strength. The sharp, cracking sound echoed through the microphone I was holding. The physical force threw my head to the side, leaving a burning, stinging heat across my cheek. "You hacked my company!" Reginald roared, spitting the words directly into my face as the entire ballroom erupted in screams of shock. "You hacked my private servers to frame my son-in-law. I have already called the police, you little criminal. You are going to prison tonight." The stinging heat across my cheek felt like a branding iron. My father, Reginald, stood over me, panting heavily with his hand still raised in the air. The physical force of his slap had knocked my head to the side, but I refused to let him see me fall. I slowly turned my face back to look at him. The massive ballroom was so incredibly silent that you could hear the ice melting in the crystal water glasses on the tables. Hundreds of elite high society church members held their collective breath. They were all watching the wealthy patriarch of the family physically strike his youngest daughter on the grand stage. I did not raise my hand to touch my cheek. I simply stared into the dark purple rage on the face of my father. He truly believed he had just caught a criminal. He truly believed that his precious son-in-law Spencer was a victim of my jealous hacking. Before Reginald could utter another threatening word, the heavy solid oak doors at the far end of the grand ballroom flew open with a deafening crash. The sudden violent noise made half the room jump out of their expensive seats. A dozen uniformed police officers marched through the entrance. Right behind them was a highly organized team of federal agents wearing dark tactical windbreakers with gold lettering on the back. Their heavy black combat boots thudded against the polished marble floor and then onto the plush patterned carpet. They moved with a terrifying, synchronized purpose that instantly shattered the elegant atmosphere of the Legacy Gala. The wealthy guests scrambled backward, pulling their silk gowns and tailored tuxedos out of the way. My mother Yvonne immediately seized what she thought was her moment of ultimate victory. She stepped forward on the stage with her silver designer dress shimmering under the bright spotlights. She pointed a triumphant, shaking finger directly at me. Her face contorted into a vicious smile of pure vindication as she turned to address her wealthy friends in the front row. "Watch carefully, everyone," Yvonne announced loudly, with her voice echoing across the silent room. "You are all about to see this family disappointment finally get exactly what she deserves. I always told you she was a bad seed. We tried to give her everything, and she repays us by becoming a common cybercriminal. Watch her go to jail where she belongs." She looked so incredibly proud of herself. She was practically vibrating with joy at the thought of me being hauled away in handcuffs. The lead federal agent walked up the carpeted steps to the stage. He was a tall, imposing man with a stern, weathered face and a completely unreadable expression. Reginald immediately stepped back, puffing out his chest to look like the authoritative victim. Spencer stood right behind my father, frantically trying to smooth out his expensive suit jacket while maintaining his charming, fake smile. They both fully expected the federal agent to grab my arms and read me my rights. But the tall agent did not even look at my father. He walked right past Reginald without a single glance. He completely ignored Spencer, who was visibly sweating under the harsh stage lights. The lead agent walked straight up to me and stopped. He did not reach for his handcuffs. Instead, he stood perfectly straight and gave me a sharp, respectful nod. "The perimeter is entirely secured, boss," he stated with his deep voice carrying clearly through the silent room. "We froze the offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands just like you asked. My team has complete control of the building." The entire ballroom let out a collective gasp. It was a massive wave of pure shock that rippled through the hundreds of elite guests. Women covered their mouths with their hands. Men dropped their champagne glasses onto the tables. My father stumbled backward as if he had been physically shoved. His eyes darted wildly between me and the imposing federal agent. Boss Reginald repeated with his voice trembling with a mixture of confusion and absolute terror. "What on earth is going on here?" I finally reached up and gently touched my stinging cheek. I looked my father dead in the eye, feeling absolutely nothing but cold professional detachment. "I did not hack your company, Reginald," I said with my voice projecting clearly across the stage and into the stunned audience. "I am the founder and chief executive officer of Vanguard Cybernetics. We do not hack people. We hunt the people who do. Your own board of directors legally hired my federal contracting firm to investigate the massive financial discrepancies in your corporate logistics accounts. They brought me in because they thought you were the one embezzling the money. They firmly suspected you were stealing millions from your own company to fund your lavish lifestyle and keep up fake appearances for these ridiculous country club luncheons." Reginald opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked like a fish suffocating on dry land. I took a slow, deliberate step toward him. "But my digital forensics team proved that you were not a criminal, Reginald." I continued with a tone completely devoid of any sympathy. We proved that you were just dangerously incompetent. You handed the keys to your kingdom to a man who smiled at you while he drained your life savings. We traced every single stolen dollar through a maze of encrypted servers and shadow accounts, and every single digital fingerprint led directly to your golden boy. I pointed my finger right at Spencer. The crowd gasped again. Spencer took a panicked step backward, bumping into the heavy velvet curtain behind the stage. Before the federal agents could move forward, Dominique let out a piercing, horrific scream. She threw herself in front of Spencer, using her own body to shield her white husband from the advancing officers. "You cannot arrest him!" Dominique shrieked with her face twisted in pure desperate panic. Her carefully pinned hair fell wildly around her shoulders. "Spencer did that to save this family." She sobbed hysterically while looking around at the judging faces of the high society church members. "He is the only one keeping our elite status alive." Dad was running the logistics company into the ground, and Spencer took the money to protect our legacy. He was going to double it. He was going to save us all. You are just a jealous, bitter dropout, Sydney. You are trying to destroy us because you have absolutely nothing. Dominique was completely unhinged. She was openly admitting to the entire city of Atlanta that she knew her husband was a thief, and she fully supported him because she cared more about her social status than her own father. Reginald looked at his eldest daughter with an expression of pure, devastating heartbreak. He finally realized that his golden child and his perfect son-in-law had been plotting his absolute ruin. But the confrontation was not over. Spencer reached out and gently pushed Dominique aside. He did not look scared anymore. He did not look intimidated by the federal agents surrounding the stage or the hundreds of elite guests staring at him in total disgust. Instead, he calmly straightened his expensive silk tie and brushed a piece of lint off his shoulder. He looked down at me with a sickeningly arrogant smirk that made my stomach turn. He let out a dark, echoing laugh that sent a cold chill down my spine. "Arrest me if you want!" Sydney Spencer said with a voice dripping with pure malicious confidence. "Take me away in handcuffs right now in front of all these pathetic people. It really does not matter. Because while you were busy playing detective with your little computer firm, I was securing the final pieces of the grand puzzle. You think you caught me, but you are entirely too late. I already won." Spencer stood on that elevated stage looking down at me, as if the heavily armed federal agents securing the ballroom doors were completely irrelevant. The massive room was so entirely silent that I could hear the expensive fabric of his suit rustling as he casually reached his hand into his inner breast pocket. He did not look like a man who had just been exposed for embezzling $4.2 million. He looked like a predator who had successfully cornered his prey. He pulled out a thick stack of folded legal paper. He snapped it open with a sharp, arrogant flick of his wrist. The heavy parchment caught the harsh light of the crystal chandeliers, making the official state seal visible to the elite crowd sitting in the front rows. He leaned forward over the edge of the stage and waved the legal document directly in my face. The absolute unbothered confidence radiating from him was deeply suffocating. He grabbed the microphone stand and projected his voice, ensuring every single wealthy church member in the crowded ballroom heard his ultimate victory. "You really thought you were the smartest person in the room, Sydney?" He sneered, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. "You thought playing digital detective and tracking my wire transfers would bring me down. But while you were desperately auditing my bank accounts, I was sitting in front of a probate judge. Exactly 1 hour ago, the court granted Dominique and me full permanent conservatorship over your precious Grandma Josephine." The entire ballroom erupted into a chaotic wave of shocked whispers. The high society women gasped loudly, clutching their pearl necklaces and leaning into each other, entirely captivated by this unfolding aristocratic nightmare. My father, Reginald, lowered his hand, his violently purple face shifting from pure, unadulterated rage to sudden, profound confusion. He stared at Spencer, trying to process the magnitude of what was happening. Yvonne took a confident step closer to Dominique, a victorious, eager smile stretching across her heavily powdered face. Looking at my mother, I instantly knew the terrible truth. She already knew. My own mother and my sister had actively conspired with this man to steal my grandmother's life and freedom. Spencer paced slowly across the stage, holding the court order high in the air for all the influential guests to witness. Josephine was formally diagnosed with severe late-stage dementia by two top medical professionals, he announced, projecting his voice to reach the federal agents, standing firmly by the double doors. She is completely mentally incapacitated and entirely unable to manage her own physical or financial affairs. Therefore, any sudden erratic business decisions she made recently are completely legally void. That specifically includes the ridiculous, supposedly secret sale of the historic Oak Bluffs estate she finalized earlier this week. As her legal conservators, Dominique and I now have absolute total control over every single one of her assets. And we are selling that multi-million-dollar coastal estate to my private investment associates tonight. He stopped pacing and looked directly at my father. He lowered the microphone slightly, but his voice still carried perfectly through the silent room. I am liquidating that massive island property tonight, Reginald Spencer declared smoothly. By tomorrow morning, the $4.2 million I borrowed from your logistics company will be fully replaced with plenty of interest to spare. There is no missing money. There is no corporate embezzlement. It was simply an aggressive internal family loan intended to secure our future. And since the money will be sitting safely in your corporate accounts by sunrise, you are going to tell these federal agents that your youngest daughter made a terrible mistake. You are going to tell them that this was a private business dispute, and you are dropping all charges immediately. Reginald stood perfectly still on the carpeted stairs. He looked at me, rubbing my stinging cheek where he had just struck me, and then he looked back at Spencer, who was holding the literal keys to his financial salvation. My father was a man who worshipped money and social status above absolutely all else. I watched the horrible, pathetic realization wash over his face. He did not care that his own son-in-law had stolen millions from his life work. He did not care that they had locked his elderly mother-in-law in a fake medical diagnosis. He only cared that the money was coming back, and his precious public reputation would be completely restored. He looked at Spencer and gave him a slow, hesitant nod of total submission. Yvonne stepped to the absolute edge of the wooden stage. She looked down at me with an expression of pure toxic triumph. She felt completely vindicated. Her golden child Dominique had secured the family wealth, and the troublesome black sheep had been thoroughly defeated. "You have lost, Sydney." Yvonne sneered, her voice dripping with cruel, unyielding satisfaction. "You tried to destroy this family tonight with your ridiculous computer tricks, but you failed completely. You are nothing but a massive family disappointment." She turned her head sharply toward the hotel staff, hovering nervously near the swinging kitchen doors. "Security, throw her out," Yvonne commanded, waving her manicured hand as if she were discarding a piece of worthless trash. "Get this criminal out of my sight before I have her arrested for trespassing on our private event." The hotel's security guards took a hesitant step forward, but the heavily armed federal agents standing nearby immediately shifted their weight and blocked their path. The lead agent kept his sharp eyes locked directly on me, waiting for my explicit order. I stood perfectly still on the patterned carpet. The burning sting on my cheek had completely faded into a dull, cold numbness. I looked at my mother, who was glaring at me with total disgust. I looked at my father, who had just sold out his own family to save his failing pride. I looked at Dominique, clinging to her husband like a desperate parasite. And then I looked at Spencer, who was busy straightening his silk tie, completely convinced that his fraudulent medical documents made him an untouchable king. I did not move toward the exit. I did not drop my head in shame or defeat. Instead, I let out a soft, genuine laugh. The quiet sound echoed clearly through the microphone I still held loosely in my hand. My soft laughter made the arrogant smirk falter slightly on Spencer's smug face. He narrowed his eyes, clearly unsettled by my complete lack of panic. I took one deliberate step closer to the stage, looking directly into his suddenly nervous eyes. "You went through all of that trouble to forge medical records and bribe a judge, Spencer." I said, my voice dangerously calm and entirely steady. You truly believe you can just cancel the sale of the Oak Bluffs estate because you control her assets now? I tilted my head, smiling up at him as the entire ballroom held its breath. Spencer, do you even know who Grandma sold the estate to? Spencer stares at me. The arrogant smirk on his face freezes completely. He grips the microphone stand so tightly, his knuckles turn stark white under the intense lighting. He refuses to answer my question. He truly thinks this is an elaborate bluff. He thinks I am just a desperate girl trying to play last-minute mind games with a superior opponent. Dominique wipes her tear-stained face and glares at me from behind his shoulder, breathing heavily through her nose. My mother Yvonne crosses her arms tightly over her chest, waiting impatiently for me to be dragged away by the federal agents. But the heavily armed federal agents do not move a single muscle. They stand like immovable statues guarding the exit doors, because they already know exactly what is about to happen on this stage. I slowly reach my left hand into my emerald green silk clutch. The heavy metallic clasp clicks softly in the dead silent ballroom. Everyone watches my hand as if I am pulling out a loaded weapon. And in a financial sense, I absolutely am. I pull out a crisp, thick sheet of legally bonded paper. It has the exact same official state seal as the fraudulent conservatorship document Spencer is currently waving around like a victory flag. But my document is stamped with the Supreme Court of Corporate Acquisitions. I unfold the paper with a sharp, deliberate snap that echoes loudly across the grand stage, making my father flinch. You see, Spencer? I say, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous volume that forces everyone in the massive room to lean forward just to hear me. You were so incredibly busy rushing to a corrupt probate judge this morning that you never bothered to actually read the final bill of sale for the historic Oak Bluffs estate. If you had bothered to do your basic due diligence, you would have seen the name of the purchasing entity printed right at the top. Grandma Josephine did not sell her legendary coastal property to a random stranger. She sold it directly to a massive corporate conglomerate named Vanguard Holdings. I watched the gears slowly turning in his panicked head. The realization has not completely hit him yet. The scent of his nervous sweat is starting to overpower the expensive cologne he bathed in this morning. He is still desperately clinging to his fake victory. Vanguard Holdings is a shell company. Spencer spits back at me, his voice shaking slightly. It is a faceless corporate entity used by my private investment associates to acquire luxury real estate. You do not know what you are talking about, Sydney. You are just reading random names off a public registry to sound smart in front of these people. I take another step forward, invading his personal space. I look down at the legal document in my hand, and then back up into his terrified blue eyes. Vanguard Holdings is not a faceless corporate entity. Spencer, I state with absolute chilling clarity. Vanguard Holdings is the parent company of Vanguard Cybernetics. It is my parent company. I am the sole majority shareholder. I am the primary beneficiary. And as of 9 o'clock yesterday morning, I am the sole legal owner of the historic Oak Bluffs estate. The entire ballroom erupts into absolute chaos. The wealthy church members begin shouting in complete disbelief. My mother Yvonne physically staggers backward, gripping the edge of the stage to keep from collapsing onto the floor. Reginald lets out a horrifying choking sound, as if all the oxygen has been sucked out of his lungs. He finally understands that the crown jewel of the family legacy, the multi-million-dollar coastal estate that he has coveted for decades, now belongs exclusively to the daughter he just slapped across the face. Dominique lets out another piercing shriek. That is impossible, she screams, pointing a shaking manicured finger at me. You cannot own Oak Bluffs. You cannot afford that property. You are a broke help desk technician. You live in a tiny apartment. I turn my cold gaze to my older sister. Oh, Dominique, I say with a dark, patronizing smile. I do not live in a tiny apartment. But speaking of real estate, I have another interesting piece of financial information for you and your brilliant husband. When I was running my forensic audit on Spencer's deeply corrupted bank accounts, I discovered something fascinating about your precious Atlanta mansion. You know the massive gated estate you love to host your little society luncheons at? The one you constantly use to pretend you are the richest, most successful couple in the entire city. Dominique freezes instantly. The color drains completely from her perfectly contoured face, leaving her looking like a pale ghost. Spencer suddenly looks like he is going to be physically sick right there on the polished wood floor. I continue projecting my voice so every single one of their wealthy friends hears the absolute truth. It turns out that Spencer leveraged that beautiful Atlanta mansion to cover his massive stock market losses. He took out multiple predatory loans against the property using highly questionable collateral. He defaulted on every single one of them months ago. The bank was quietly preparing to foreclose on your dream home next week and throw you out into the street. But since Vanguard Holdings is aggressively expanding its real estate portfolio, I decided to intervene. I bought your debt, Spencer. I bought every single predatory loan you signed. I paid them off in full and transferred the deed directly to my corporate holdings. I paused, letting the crushing weight of reality completely suffocate them. And unfortunately for you, Spencer, I say with a bright, beautiful smile, that means I am your landlord, and you are severely behind on your rent. The sheer magnitude of the humiliation is absolute. The elite guests in the front rows are whispering frantically, pointing at Dominique, who is now openly sobbing into her shaking hands. Their perfect wealthy facade has been entirely incinerated in front of the entire city. My father is staring at the floor, completely broken and defeated by his own massive ignorance. Yvonne looks like she wants the stage floor to open up and swallow her whole. But Spencer refuses to accept his total destruction. His mind violently rejects the reality of his situation. He violently shakes his head, his slicked back hair falling into his sweating face. He grips the microphone stand and leans forward, his eyes wide and manic. He lets out a loud, desperate, arrogant laugh that sounds completely unhinged. "It does not matter who bought it!" Spencer screams, his voice cracking through the massive speakers. "Do you hear me, Sydney? It does not matter if Vanguard Holdings bought Oak Bluffs. It does not matter if you bought my debt. The conservatorship changes everything. It completely invalidates the signature of a crazy old woman. She did not have the mental capacity to sign those documents yesterday. The sale is entirely void. The property goes back into the estate, and Dominique and I control the estate. We win. You hear me? We win." He stands there panting heavily, looking wild and completely pathetic as he tries to convince himself that he has outsmarted me. He truly believes his fraudulent medical paperwork is a magic shield that will protect him from the federal agents standing just a few feet away. But suddenly the massive ballroom sound system begins to emit a strange low hum. The speakers crackle to life with a sharp, piercing burst of static. The sudden electronic noise interrupts Spencer's manic victory speech. The entire room falls dead silent again as everyone looks up at the massive audio speakers suspended from the high ceiling. The crackling static clears, and then a voice echoes through the grand ballroom. It is a voice so sharp, so incredibly clear, and so intensely authoritative that it makes my mother Yvonne physically drop to her knees on the stage. "Who are you calling crazy little white boy?" The sharp, authoritative voice echoed through the massive speakers and seemed to shake the crystal chandeliers hanging from the high ceiling. Every single head in the grand ballroom snapped toward the back entrance. The heavy wooden doors were pushed wide open by two muscular federal agents. The crowd of wealthy socialites parted instantly like the Red Sea. They scrambled out of the center aisle, stepping on their own expensive silk gowns and knocking over chairs in their desperate rush to get out of the way. Standing at the threshold was not the frail, confused woman my family had described in their fraudulent court documents. Grandma Josephine stood perfectly straight without the wheelchair my mother claimed she was permanently confined to. She wore a tailored black wool suit that fit her commanding frame perfectly. Her silver hair was elegantly styled, and her dark eyes were sharp and furious. She leaned slightly on a polished mahogany cane with a heavy silver handle, but she clearly did not need it for physical balance. She used it more like a royal scepter to announce her terrifying presence. Flanking my grandmother were two incredibly serious-looking men in dark tailored suits. On her left was a man I recognized from my extensive digital background checks. He was the top federal prosecutor for the entire district. On her right was an older, distinguished gentleman carrying a thick leather briefcase. The three of them began a slow, deliberate march down the center aisle toward the stage. The only sound in the massive ballroom was the rhythmic sharp tap of my grandmother's silver cane striking the polished marble floor, and then the soft thud as it hit the plush patterned carpet. The rhythmic tapping sounded like a dark ticking clock counting down to my family's absolute destruction. The wealthy church members shrank back against their tables, completely terrified of making eye contact with the furious matriarch. My mother Yvonne let out a loud, dramatic gasp from the stage. She completely abandoned her earlier stance of cruel triumph and instantly shifted into the role of the deeply concerned, loving daughter. Mother Yvonne shrieked, her voice pitching into a hysterical fake sob. She threw her hands in the air and rushed forward. "Mother, what are you doing out of your bed? The doctors said you need constant supervision. You are confused and wandering again." Yvonne practically leaped down the carpeted stairs of the stage, running directly toward Josephine. She reached her arms out, pretending she just wanted to embrace her sick mother and protect her from the frightening federal agents. But before Yvonne could get within 10 feet of my grandmother, 3 federal agents stepped smoothly into the aisle. They formed a solid human wall of dark windbreakers and tactical gear directly in her path. Yvonne slammed into the chest of a massive agent and bounced backward. "How dare you touch me?" she screamed, crying fake tears and looking around at her wealthy friends for sympathy. "My mother is severely ill. She does not know where she is. You are traumatizing a sick old woman with severe dementia. Please let me take my mother home right now." The federal agents did not even blink. They crossed their arms and stared down at Yvonne with complete professional indifference. Josephine stopped walking. She looked at her daughter struggling against the federal agents, and her expression was filled with absolute pure disgust. She did not look confused or lost in the slightest. She looked like a powerful matriarch who had finally seen the true rotten core of her own greedy children. The distinguished gentleman standing on Josephine's right stepped forward and opened his heavy leather briefcase. He pulled out a thick stack of medical records, bearing the official seal of one of the most prestigious medical institutions in the world. He looked out at the silent audience of high society church members and cleared his throat. "My name is Dr. Harrison," he announced, projecting his voice clearly across the room. "I am the chief of neurology at Johns Hopkins Hospital. Over the past 48 hours, my elite medical team and I have conducted a completely exhaustive series of cognitive and neurological examinations on Josephine. We administered every single advanced diagnostic test available in modern medicine to verify her exact mental state." Dr. Harrison turned his head and glared directly at Spencer, who was now visibly trembling on the stage. "I can state with absolute medical certainty that Josephine does not have dementia," he declared. "She does not have Alzheimer's or any other cognitive decline. Her cognitive function is completely flawless, and her mental acuity is sharper than most people half her age. She is in perfect mental and physical health." The dementia diagnosis that was presented to the probate judge this morning was completely and entirely fabricated. The wealthy crowd erupted into shocked murmurs again. Dr. Harrison held up a specific piece of paper from his stack, showing it to the federal agents. "The local doctor who signed your conservatorship documents. Spencer is a known fraud. Thanks to the forensic financial data provided by Vanguard Cybernetics, we have definitive proof that you wired $50,000 of embezzled corporate funds to that corrupt doctor just 3 days ago. You literally paid him to falsely diagnose your wife's grandmother so you could steal her estate." Spencer dropped the fake conservatorship document onto the stage floor. It fluttered down like a completely useless piece of trash. His knees visibly buckled, and he had to grab the metal microphone stand just to keep himself from collapsing completely onto the wooden boards. The arrogant, confident smirk was permanently erased from his sweating face. Dominique was hyperventilating, clutching her diamond necklace and looking frantically for an exit that simply did not exist. Every single door in the building was blocked by federal agents. Reginald was still frozen on the stairs, staring at his mother-in-law in total, absolute horror. He finally realized that his desperate attempt to save his public reputation had just tied him directly to a massive federal conspiracy to defraud an elderly woman. His legacy was entirely dead. Grandma Josephine resumed her slow, confident walk toward the stage. The crowd watched her with a mixture of pure terror and profound respect. She bypassed my sobbing fake mother without a single glance downward. She stopped at the base of the wooden stage and looked up at the pathetic people who had tried to steal her entire life. She looked at Reginald and shook her head in silent, bitter disappointment. Then she raised her polished mahogany cane. She pointed the heavy silver handle directly at Spencer and Dominique, who were cowering together near the back velvet curtain. Josephine did not yell or raise her voice. She spoke with a calm, lethal authority that demanded absolute total obedience. "Show them what you found, Sydney." Josephine commanded, her voice echoing clearly through the entire ballroom. "Play the tape from the closet." The sharp cracking sound of my father striking me echoed through the microphone I was still holding. The physical force threw my head to the side, leaving a burning, stinging heat across my cheek. I slowly turned my face back to look at him. The massive ballroom was so incredibly silent that you could hear the ice melting in the crystal water glasses on the tables. My father, Reginald, stood over me, panting heavily with his hands still raised in the air. He truly believed he had just caught a criminal. He truly believed that his precious son-in-law Spencer was a victim of my jealous hacking. I did not raise my hand to touch my cheek. I simply stared into the dark purple rage on his face. Before Reginald could utter another threatening word, the heavy, solid oak doors at the far end of the grand ballroom flew open with a deafening crash. The sudden, violent noise made half the room jump out of their expensive seats. A dozen uniformed police officers marched through the entrance. Right behind them was a highly organized team of federal agents wearing dark tactical windbreakers with gold lettering on the back. Their heavy black combat boots thudded against the polished marble floor and then onto the plush patterned carpet. They moved with a terrifying synchronized purpose that instantly shattered the elegant atmosphere of the Legacy Gala. The federal agents immediately fanned out across the room, physically blocking every single exit and securing the perimeter. The wealthy guests scrambled backward, pulling their silk gowns and tailored tuxedos out of the way. My mother, Yvonne, immediately seized what she thought was her moment of ultimate victory. She stepped forward on the stage with her silver designer dress shimmering under the bright spotlights. She pointed a triumphant, shaking finger directly at me. Her face contorted into a vicious smile of pure vindication as she turned to address her wealthy friends in the front row. "Watch carefully, everyone," Yvonne announced loudly with her voice echoing across the silent room. "You are all about to see this family disappointment finally get exactly what she deserves. I always told you she was a bad seed. We tried to give her everything and she repays us by becoming a common cyber criminal. Watch her go to jail tonight right where she belongs." She looked so incredibly proud of herself. She was practically vibrating with joy at the thought of me being hauled away in handcuffs. The elite high society women in the front row began whispering to each other, fully expecting to see me dragged off the stage in disgrace. The lead federal agent walked up the carpeted steps to the stage. He was a tall, imposing man with a stern, weathered face and a completely unreadable expression. Reginald immediately stepped back, puffing out his chest to look like the authoritative victim. Spencer stood right behind my father, frantically trying to smooth out his expensive suit jacket while maintaining his charming fake smile. They both fully expected the federal agent to grab my arms and read me my rights. But the tall agent did not even look at my father. He walked right past Reginald without a single glance. He completely ignored Spencer, who was visibly sweating under the harsh stage lights. The lead agent walked straight up to me and stopped. He did not reach for his handcuffs. Instead, he stood perfectly straight and gave me a sharp, respectful nod. "The perimeter is secured, boss," the agent stated with his deep voice, carrying clearly through the silent room. "We froze the offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands just like you asked. My team has complete control of the building." The entire ballroom let out a collective gasp. It was a massive wave of pure shock that rippled through the hundreds of elite guests. Women covered their mouths with their hands. Men dropped their champagne glasses onto the tables. My mother Yvonne froze completely, her triumphant smile melting into an expression of absolute horror. My father stumbled backward as if he had been physically shoved. His eyes darted wildly between me and the imposing federal agent. Boss Reginald repeated, with his voice trembling with a mixture of confusion and absolute terror, "What on earth is going on here?" I finally reached up and gently touched my stinging cheek. I looked my father dead in the eye, feeling absolutely nothing but cold professional detachment. "I did not hack your company, Reginald," I said with my voice projecting clearly across the stage and into the stunned audience. "I am the founder and chief executive officer of Vanguard Cybernetics. We do not hack people. We hunt the people who do. Your own board of directors legally hired my federal contracting firm to investigate the massive financial discrepancies in your corporate logistics accounts. They bypassed you entirely because they thought you were the one embezzling the money. They firmly suspected you were stealing millions from your own company to fund your lavish lifestyle and keep up fake appearances for these ridiculous country club luncheons." Reginald opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked like a fish suffocating on dry land. I took a slow, deliberate step toward him. "But my digital forensics team proved that you were not a criminal. Reginald," I continued with a tone completely devoid of any sympathy, "we proved that you were just dangerously incompetent. You handed the keys to your kingdom to a man who smiled at you while he drained your life savings. We traced every single stolen dollar through a maze of encrypted servers and shadow accounts. And every single digital fingerprint led directly to your golden boy." I pointed my finger right at Spencer. The crowd gasped again. Spencer took a panicked step backward, bumping into the heavy velvet curtain behind the stage. Before the federal agents could move forward, Dominique let out a piercing, horrific scream. She threw herself in front of Spencer, using her own body to shield her husband from the advancing officers. "You cannot arrest him!" Dominique shrieked with her face twisted in pure, desperate panic. Her carefully pinned hair fell wildly around her shoulders. "Spencer did that to save this family." She sobbed hysterically while looking around at the judging faces of the high society church members. "He is the only one keeping our elite status alive. Dad was running the logistics company into the ground, and Spencer took the money to protect our legacy. He was going to double it. He was going to save us all. You are just a jealous, bitter dropout, Sydney. You are trying to destroy us because you have absolutely nothing." Dominique was completely unhinged. She was openly admitting to the entire city of Atlanta that she knew her husband was a thief, and she fully supported him because she cared more about her social status than her own father. Reginald looked at his eldest daughter with an expression of pure, devastating heartbreak. He finally realized that his golden child and his perfect son-in-law had been plotting his absolute ruin behind his back. But the confrontation was not over. Spencer reached out and gently pushed Dominique aside. He did not look scared anymore. He did not look intimidated by the federal agents surrounding the stage or the hundreds of elite guests staring at him in total disgust. Instead, he calmly straightened his expensive silk tie and brushed a piece of lint off his shoulder. He looked down at me with a sickeningly arrogant smirk that made my stomach turn. He let out a dark, echoing laugh that sent a cold chill down my spine. "Arrest me if you want," Sydney Spencer said with a voice dripping with pure malicious confidence. "Take me away in handcuffs right now in front of all these pathetic people. It really does not matter. Because while you were busy playing detective with your little computer firm, I was securing the final pieces of the grand puzzle. You think you caught me, but you are entirely too late. I already won." I stand perfectly still on the wooden stage and look at my grandmother. She gives me a slow, approving nod. Her dark eyes are filled with a fierce, unyielding strength that completely anchors me. I reach my hand into the front pocket of my tailored blazer and pull out my phone. The entire ballroom watches my every single movement, as if they are entirely hypnotized by what is unfolding. I walk slowly across the stage toward the grand audio mixer, sitting on a draped table near the heavy velvet curtains. The hotel audio technician is standing there, looking completely terrified, but he immediately steps aside, and lets me access the main soundboard. I pick up the heavy auxiliary cable connecting the massive ballroom speakers. I plug the metal jack directly into my phone. The speakers emit a soft electronic pop that echoes loudly through the dead silent room. I look down at my glowing screen and open the secured audio file I successfully extracted from their home security system earlier this week. I press play and take a deliberate step back from the control table. For a brief second, there is only a faint, static hiss, and then the crisp, unmistakable voices of Spencer and Dominique fill the massive grand ballroom. Their private conversation echoes off the high ceilings and crystal chandeliers, exposing their darkest, most malicious secrets to the entire world. Dominique's sharp, whining voice is the first to speak. She sounds heavily annoyed and impatient. She tells Spencer that the probate judge is getting suspicious, and they need the medical evaluation done immediately. Then Spencer's arrogant voice replies. He tells her to stop panicking and stick exactly to the plan. He clearly instructs his wife to crush up the highly restricted sedatives he procured on the black market. He tells her to mix the crushed pills directly into Grandma Josephine's evening chamomile tea. The audio recording continues playing loudly for all the wealthy elite guests to hear. Spencer explains exactly how the dangerous medication will temporarily destroy her cognitive function. He lists the exact heavy dosage they need to use to ensure she cannot speak clearly or remember her own name. He tells Dominique that the heavy sedatives will make the old woman completely disoriented and entirely unable to answer basic questions during the legal assessment. He laughs on the recording, bragging about how the corrupt doctor will perform the medical evaluation while she is heavily drugged and slumped helplessly in her armchair. Dominique actually giggles on the tape. The sound of her cruel, high-pitched laughter is absolutely chilling to hear. She tells her husband that she will brew the tea extra strong to hide the bitter chemical taste of the crushed pills. She even complains about having to pretend to care for the old woman while they wait for the heavy drugs to take effect. She sounds entirely thrilled at the prospect of literally poisoning her own grandmother just to secure her massive inheritance. The recording clicks off, leaving a heavy, suffocating silence in its terrible wake. The reaction from the high society crowd is absolutely instantaneous and completely devastating. A collective gasp of pure visceral horror ripples through the hundreds of seated guests. This is no longer just a sophisticated white-collar financial crime or a clever corporate embezzlement scheme. This is severe and violent elder abuse. This is the malicious, calculated poisoning of a beloved family matriarch. The wealthy women in the front rows cover their mouths in absolute shock, their eyes wide with pure, unadulterated disgust. The influential men in their tailored tuxedos shake their heads, staring up at Spencer and Dominique as if they are literal monsters walking among them. The flawless, pristine social reputation that my sister and her husband spent years meticulously building is completely incinerated in a matter of seconds. They are no longer the golden couple of Atlanta high society. They are definitively exposed as ruthless, calculating criminals who physically tortured an elderly woman for money. Dominique stands absolutely frozen on the stage. Her perfect, wealthy world is rapidly collapsing all around her, and she finally understands the inescapable reality of her dark situation. She looks out at the faces of her influential friends and sees nothing but pure revulsion. The prominent women who used to beg for invitations to her exclusive garden parties are now looking at her like she is a dangerous predator. Dominique realizes she is going to federal prison. She realizes she will lose her sprawling mansion, her designer clothes, and her precious social standing. Pure animal panic takes over her entire shaking body. She kicks off her expensive designer high heels, leaving them abandoned on the stage floor. She turns away from the horrified crowd and makes a desperate, pathetic dash toward the side exit door located near the kitchen hallway. But she does not even make it 3 full steps. My mother Yvonne lunges forward with surprising speed and violently grabs Dominique by the bare arm. Yvonne's heavily powdered face is twisted into a mask of pure terror and absolute social agony. She does not care that her daughter is facing years in a federal penitentiary. She does not even care that her own elderly mother was maliciously poisoned by these two monsters. She only cares that her golden child is currently behaving like a common street criminal in front of the entire country club elite. Yvonne digs her manicured acrylic nails deep into Dominique's skin, physically dragging her to a sudden, violent halt. "You will not run," Yvonne hisses through clenched teeth, her eyes darting frantically toward the horrified guests. "You will not embarrass this family any further, Dominique. You will stand right here and face this with dignity before you ruin my social reputation permanently." Dominique struggles weakly against her mother, sobbing hysterically with dark mascara running down her pale cheeks. She is completely broken. The lead federal agent, standing near the stage, gives a sharp, silent nod to his heavily armed team. The time for talking is entirely over. 4 tactical officers step forward in perfect unison. Their heavy black boots thud against the stage steps as they move in to arrest the man who orchestrated this massive criminal conspiracy. They approach Spencer with their hands resting firmly on their utility belts. Spencer is backed completely against the heavy velvet curtain. He looks at the approaching federal agents, and his arrogant composure finally shatters into a million jagged pieces. The illusion of his absolute control is dead. He sees the steel handcuffs glinting under the stage lights, and he realizes he has absolutely no escape. In his final moment of sheer pathetic desperation, Spencer proves exactly what kind of man he truly is. He reaches out and violently grabs his sobbing wife by the shoulders. He rips Dominique away from Yvonne's grasp and physically shoves her forward. He throws his own wife directly into the path of the advancing federal officers, using her as a human shield to delay his inevitable arrest. Dominique stumbles forward and crashes hard into the chest of the lead agent, letting out a terrified shriek. Spencer presses himself flat against the back wall, pointing a shaking finger directly at the woman he promised to love and protect. "It was her idea," he screams, his voice cracking with pure pathetic cowardice. "She drugged the tea. She forged the documents. I have proof she acted entirely alone." The name hangs heavy in the dead silent ballroom. Dominique slowly turns her head away from the glowing projector screen and looks directly at her husband. Her tear-stained face is completely frozen in a mask of absolute bewilderment. She stares at the name Chloe Winters illuminated in bright white letters across the massive screen behind them. "The Cayman Islands bank account holds every single dollar of my father Reginald's stolen corporate pension fund. And the sole beneficiary of that massive offshore account is a woman Dominique has never heard of in her entire life." "Who is Chloe Winters?" she screams. Her voice tears through the silent room, echoing off the crystal chandeliers and bouncing against the heavy velvet curtains. She grabs the lapels of Spencer's ruined suit jacket and shakes him violently. Spencer is entirely speechless. His arrogant facade has completely dissolved into pure, unadulterated terror. He looks like a cornered animal desperately searching for an escape route that simply does not exist. He opens his mouth, but absolutely no sound comes out. He just stammers and chokes on his own miserable lies. Reginald steps forward, his purple face twisting into a terrifying new kind of rage. He realizes his stolen retirement money was not used to secure the family legacy. It was given away to a complete stranger. The heavy, suffocating silence in the grand ballroom is suddenly broken by the sharp sound of a wooden chair pushing back from a table. Every single head in the massive room snaps toward the noise. Down on the main floor near the center aisle sits table number 4. It is a premium table typically reserved for special corporate guests and extended business associates. A young woman slowly stands up from her seat. She is stunningly beautiful with long blonde hair falling perfectly over a very expensive tailored silk dress. She looks incredibly out of place amidst the aging wealthy church members and the conservative socialites. She is holding a heavily customized designer baby bag tightly over her delicate shoulder. The elite guests sitting nearby physically recoil from her presence as if she is dangerously radioactive. The sea of wealthy socialites parts instantly, creating a wide, clear path between table 4 and the wooden stage. The young woman steps gracefully into the center aisle. She does not look intimidated by the heavily armed federal agents or the tactical police officers surrounding the perimeter. She walks forward with a calm, steady confidence that completely shatters whatever remaining sanity Dominique has left in her body. The young woman stops at the absolute base of the carpeted stairs, looking directly up at the elevated stage. Her bright green eyes lock onto Spencer with a powerful mixture of profound disgust and cold, sickening realization. "My name is Chloe Winters," she says. Her voice is exceptionally soft, but it carries perfectly through the silent, cavernous room. She clutches the expensive designer baby bag much tighter against her side. "I am his fiancée." The collective gasp from the high society crowd is so incredibly loud, it sounds like a sudden violent rush of wind. Dominique physically stumbles backward as if she has been shot point blank in the chest. Her shaking hands fly up to cover her open mouth. Chloe takes one deliberate step up the stairs, her gaze never leaving Spencer's terrified, sweating face. "He told me he was finalizing his messy divorce from a deeply unstable woman." She continues projecting her voice, so every single person in the room hears the pathetic truth. "He told me the marriage had been completely dead for years, and he was just waiting for the final legal paperwork to clear the courts. He promised me we were starting a real family together far away from all this toxic Atlanta high society drama. He told me he secured a massive offshore corporate investment to buy us a private estate where we could raise our 6-month-old son in total peace." The shocking revelation drops like a massive explosive device directly onto the wooden stage. Dominique lets out a sound that is entirely inhuman. It is a guttural, agonizing wail of pure primal devastation that shakes the very walls of the building. Her perfect, successful husband did not just steal millions of dollars from her foolish father. He did not just maliciously poison her elderly grandmother with black market sedatives. He had been living an entirely secret double life right under her very nose. He had fathered a beautiful child with a stunning younger woman and funded their secret luxurious lifestyle using her own family's stolen wealth. Spencer had carefully planned to take the embezzled millions and disappear entirely with his secret family. He was fully prepared to leave Dominique behind to face the absolute financial ruin and the ruthless federal investigators entirely alone. He was going to let his devoted wife take the fall for everything while he played the loving father on a private tropical island. Reginald clutches his chest tightly, his breathing becoming dangerously shallow and ragged as he watches his brilliant golden son-in-law exposed as a ruthless sociopathic parasite. Spencer raises his trembling hands, trying desperately to back away from the edge of the stage. He looks frantically at the armed federal agents, begging them with his wide, terrified eyes to immediately intervene. But the seasoned agents simply stand their ground and watch as the perfectly manicured wealthy socialite completely loses her mind. Dominique completely snaps. The polished, refined country club facade violently peels away, revealing absolutely nothing but raw, unhinged fury. She lunges forward like a starving wild animal. She throws her entire body weight directly at Spencer, screaming completely incomprehensible curses. Her perfectly manicured acrylic nails rake violently across the side of his face. Deep red scratch marks instantly appear across his cheek and neck, drawing fresh blood. Spencer lets out a high-pitched yelp of absolute pain and stumbles backward, tripping awkwardly over the thick black microphone cord. He crashes heavily onto the wooden floorboards with a loud, sickening thud. Dominique dives right on top of him without a single second of hesitation. She grabs massive fistfuls of his expensive tailored suit, tearing the delicate fabric and screaming that she is going to completely destroy him. She beats her fists relentlessly against his chest, pouring years of toxic pride and shattered ego into every single violent blow. The heavy black boots of the federal agents finally pound across the wooden stage. 3 large tactical officers swarm the violently struggling couple. They grab Dominique by the shoulders and physically drag her off her bleeding, terrified husband. She kicks and thrashes violently against the strong officers, completely blind with relentless rage. Her expensive silver designer dress is torn at the seams, and her carefully styled hair is a wild, tangled mess around her face. The officers expertly secure her flailing arms behind her back, pulling her away as she continues to scream vile insults at the man she once worshipped. 2 other tactical agents grab Spencer by his torn, ruined suit jacket. They haul him roughly to his feet without any gentleness. Blood is dripping down his scratched face, staining his crisp white collar and silk tie. They slam him aggressively against the solid stage wall and tightly secure his wrists in heavy steel handcuffs. My mother, Yvonne, stands completely frozen near the edge of the stage, watching her entire beautiful kingdom burn to ash. Her precious golden child is being physically restrained by federal police officers. Her perfect, wealthy son-in-law is bleeding in heavy steel handcuffs. Her stolen corporate wealth is gone forever. Her immaculate social reputation is permanently and utterly destroyed. The elite women in the front row are already whispering frantically to one another, eagerly planning how they will completely ostracize Yvonne from every single country club and charity board in the entire city. They look at my mother with pure, undisguised pity and absolute disgust. Yvonne cannot handle the sheer magnitude of the crushing public humiliation. The heavy weight of the social disgrace physically crushes her spine. She drops heavily onto her knees right there on the patterned stage carpet. She throws her head back and begins to wail into the high ceiling. It is a loud, pathetic, agonizing sound of a miserable woman mourning the only thing she ever truly loved, which was her fake high society image. She pounds her weak hands against the wooden stage floor, weeping bitterly as the federal agents begin marching her bleeding son-in-law toward the heavy exit doors. The heavy wooden doors slam shut behind Spencer as the federal agents finally drag him out of the grand ballroom. His desperate, pathetic screams echo faintly down the long hotel corridor before fading into complete and total silence. Dominique is still thrashing wildly against the tactical officers who are holding her arms tightly behind her back. She is sobbing uncontrollably and spitting pure venom at the empty doorway, completely broken by the sudden, violent reality of her shattered life. Chloe Winters stands perfectly still at table 4, adjusting the thick leather strap of her expensive designer baby bag. She looks up at the ruined golden child on the stage with a mixture of quiet pity and absolute disgust. She does not offer a single word of apology or explanation. She simply turns around and walks calmly out of the ballroom, leaving a trail of absolute destruction in her wake. My mother Yvonne is still on her knees on the patterned stage carpet. She watches the young, beautiful mistress walk out the door, and she finally realizes the absolute magnitude of the social catastrophe unfolding around her. The elite country club women in the front rows are staring at her. Their faces are frozen in masks of pure aristocratic horror. These are the incredibly wealthy women Yvonne has spent her entire life trying to impress. These are the powerful church ladies who control the social hierarchy of the entire city and who dictate who belongs and who is cast out. Yvonne takes a shaky, dramatic breath and immediately shifts into pure survival mode. She wipes her tear-stained face, smearing her expensive foundation across her cheeks, and quickly crawls toward the absolute edge of the wooden stage. She reaches her trembling hands out toward the front row of wealthy guests, acting as if she is the one who has been horribly wronged. "Please, you have to believe us," Yvonne cries out, her voice breaking with heavily manufactured sorrow. "We are completely innocent in all of this. We have been unfairly targeted by malicious outsiders who want to destroy our good family name. That monster Spencer deceived all of us. He infiltrated our perfect Christian home and took advantage of my sweet, trusting Dominique. We had absolutely no idea he was living a secret double life. We are the true victims here." I stand near the audio-visual control table watching my mother deliver the most pathetic theatrical performance of her entire life. She is perfectly willing to throw her beloved son-in-law to the wolves just to save her precious country club memberships. She genuinely thinks her fake tears and her practiced victim routine will actually work on these highly influential women. She thinks she can just sweep the poisoning of her own mother and the embezzlement of millions of dollars under the rug by crying on command. But I refuse to let her spin this false narrative. I refuse to let her walk away clean from the burning wreckage she actively helped create. I pick up my silver digital tablet from the draped table. I swipe across the glowing screen and tap a highly encrypted folder containing the final piece of my forensic audit. The massive projector screen hanging behind the stage flashes brightly. The dark offshore account documents disappear and are instantly replaced by a series of highly detailed domestic banking ledgers. The new financial documents are incredibly crisp and blown up to massive proportions, so every single guest sitting in the very back of the room can clearly read the fine print. "Stop crying, Mom," I say into the microphone. My voice is deadly calm and it cuts through her fake hysterical sobbing like a jagged piece of glass. "You are not a victim. You are just a very bad liar. You knew absolutely everything about Chloe Winters and her 6-month-old baby." Yvonne freezes instantly with her hands still reaching out toward the audience. She slowly turns her head to look at the massive projector screen behind her. Her jaw drops open, and the last remaining drop of color drains completely from her powdered face. She looks like a woman standing on the gallows, watching the trapdoor swing open. I tap the screen of my tablet, highlighting a specific column of recurring monthly transactions. The digital rows illuminate in bright yellow for the entire silent room to witness. "Take a very close look at these banking ledgers," I instruct the crowd. "For the past entire year, my mother has been wiring exactly $10,000 on the first of every single month directly into a private checking account owned by Chloe Winters. She has been paying massive amounts of hush money to keep Spencer's secret fiancé completely quiet and hidden from the public eye." The church ladies in the front row lean forward, squinting at the projected documents. I watch their eyes widen in absolute terror as they read the name of the originating bank account printed clearly at the top of the ledger. But my mother did not use her own personal money to pay off her son-in-law's. "Pregnant mistress," I announce, letting the absolute gravity of the betrayal sink in. "She used the elite church charity fund." As the head treasurer of the congregation, Yvonne has had unrestricted access to the community donation accounts for years. She literally stole tens of thousands of dollars meant for the community outreach programs just to protect Dominique's perfect high society marriage image. She stole from the church to hide an illegitimate child. The reaction from the crowd is completely devastating. The church ladies are the absolute core of Yvonne's entire existence. Hearing that their sacred charity funds were systematically drained to cover up a filthy affair absolutely destroys them. A prominent elderly woman wearing a heavy pearl necklace stands up from the front table. She looks at my mother with an expression of pure, unadulterated revulsion. "You are a disgusting hypocrite, Yvonne," the woman says, her voice shaking with righteous anger. One by one, the wealthy, influential women in the front rows begin to stand up. They do not say another word to her. They do not yell or demand an apology. They simply pick up their expensive evening bags, pull their silk shawls tightly around their shoulders, and physically turn their backs on my mother. They begin marching toward the grand exit doors in a silent, synchronized display of total social excommunication. My father, Reginald, covers his face with his trembling hands, realizing that he can never show his face in this city again. Yvonne watches her entire social empire crumble to dust in a matter of seconds. The exclusive country club memberships, the charity galas, the prestigious luncheons are all permanently gone. She has absolutely nothing left. Her husband is ruined. Her golden child is a national scandal. Her social status is completely dead, and the bank is going to foreclose on their home by the end of the week. She drops her toxic pride entirely. She turns away from the departing crowd and looks at me. She crawls frantically across the hard wooden stage, dragging her ruined silver designer dress behind her until she is right at my feet. "Sydney, please," she begs, her voice cracking into a desperate, pathetic wail. She reaches up and grabs the fabric of my trousers with her shaking hands. "I am your mother. Do not let them take our home." I stand perfectly still under the bright stage lights and look down at the pathetic, weeping woman clutching the fabric of my trousers. Yvonne is completely unrecognizable from the pristine, arrogant socialite who paraded into this ballroom just an hour ago. Her expensive silver designer dress is deeply wrinkled and stained with her own tears and dark smeared makeup. Her perfectly pinned hair has fallen in ragged, chaotic strands around her pale, terrified face. She looks up at me with wide, desperate eyes, begging for mercy from the daughter she spent her entire life trying to destroy. I feel absolutely nothing. There is no sympathy in my chest, and there is no sudden wave of familial obligation or lingering guilt. I simply look down at her coldly, feeling only the quiet, satisfying weight of absolute justice. "You are my mother," Yvonne wails, her voice echoing through the nearly empty ballroom. The federal agents are already pulling Dominique and Spencer through the heavy oak doors at the back of the room, but Yvonne does not even turn her head to watch her golden child being hauled away to federal prison. She is entirely focused on her own selfish survival. "Please, Sydney," she begs, her acrylic nails digging into my leg. "You have all this money now. You have your big, successful technology firm. You can easily pay off the bank. You cannot let them take our beautiful house. It is our family legacy. Where will your father and I go? You have to save our home." I slowly reach down and pry her shaking fingers off my clothing. I step back, breaking her physical contact and leaving her kneeling alone on the carpeted stage. I calmly open the gold clasp of my black velvet evening clutch. I reach inside and my fingers brush against the thick folded stack of heavy legal parchment. I pull the official document out into the bright light. The crisp white paper features a very prominent embossed red seal from the state Supreme Court. Yvonne stares at the folded document, and her frantic sobbing slowly trails off into a confused, terrified silence. She does not know exactly what I am holding, but her survival instincts tell her it is the final nail in her social coffin. I look directly into her bloodshot eyes. 10 years ago, I say, my voice perfectly steady and carrying effortlessly through the quiet room. 10 years ago, I stood in the grand foyer of that massive, beautiful house and begged you for my own college savings. I had earned my acceptance to Stanford. I had worked 3 jobs just to survive your endless emotional neglect and constant criticism. But when I asked for the education fund that grandfather specifically left for me, you laughed right in my face. You took every single dollar of my college money, and you used it to pay for Dominique's extravagant country club wedding. You completely stole my future to fund her fake perfection. Yvonne shrinks back, trembling violently as the cold, hard truth of the past is dragged out into the spotlight. And when I cried, I continue stepping closer to her shrinking form. When I begged you to reconsider because I had absolutely nothing left, you looked me dead in the eye and pointed at the front door. You told me that failures do not belong in your house. You threw me out onto the street in the pouring rain with nothing but a cheap suitcase and a broken heart. You told me I was a complete embarrassment to the family legacy, and you demanded that I never show my face on your pristine property ever again. I unfold the heavy legal document, letting the thick pages drop open. "Well, Mom," I say, looking down at the official bank seal, "you should have paid much closer attention to your own finances instead of worrying about my failures. When Spencer's greedy little mistress demanded more money, you panicked. You realized the church charity fund you were embezzling from was running dangerously low, and people were starting to ask questions. You needed $10,000 every single month in liquid cash to keep Chloe completely quiet and protect Dominique's fake perfect marriage. So you made a terrible, desperate choice. You completely stopped paying the mortgage on the family estate. You let the loans go into catastrophic default for 6 straight months just to pay off the mistress." Yvonne covers her mouth with both hands, her eyes wide with absolute horror. She realizes I know every single intimate detail of her pathetic financial crimes. The bank naturally moved to foreclose on the property. I explain, my tone completely devoid of any pity. They quietly prepared to seize the estate and auction it off to the highest bidder to recoup their massive losses. But before the bank could publicly list the property, my legal team at Vanguard Cybernetics stepped in. We acted through an anonymous corporate proxy. We paid off the outstanding debt in full, and we officially purchased the entire mortgage directly from the lending institution. I hold the official eviction notice right in front of her terrified face. "I own the debt, Mom." I announce, the truth ringing like a gunshot. "I own the absolute rights to the estate. It is my property now. And just like you told me 10 years ago, failures do not belong in my house." Yvonne lets out a suffocated gasp as if the oxygen has been violently sucked out of her lungs. She falls backward onto the stage, completely paralyzed by the devastating reality of her absolute ruin. She is entirely homeless. She has no money, no social standing, and absolutely nowhere to hide. Her influential friends have abandoned her, and the daughter she threw away now holds the absolute deed to her entire life. You have exactly 7 days to vacate the premises, I tell her, staring down at her broken form. My private security team will be arriving next Friday morning at 8 o'clock sharp to change every single lock on the property. If you or your husband are still inside that house, my armed guards will physically drag you out onto the front lawn and leave you on the curb. You will not take any furniture. You will not take any artwork. You will pack one single suitcase just like I did, and you will walk out the front door forever. The absolute finality of my words completely shatters Yvonne. She curls into a tight, miserable ball on the floor, weeping with a profound, devastating despair that she once inflicted on me without a single second of hesitation. But the confrontation is not entirely finished. From the dark shadows near the back of the stage, Reginald suddenly pushes himself away from the wall. He has been standing there in shocked silence, watching his entire empire burn to the ground, but his toxic pride will not allow him to simply surrender. He is sweating profusely, and his breathing is dangerously heavy, but his eyes are burning with a wild, desperate arrogance. He has been stripped of his wealth, his golden son-in-law, and his home, but he still thinks he can somehow outsmart me. He stumbles forward, pointing a shaking finger directly at my face. "You cannot do this to us!" Reginald yells, his voice echoing loudly through the massive ballroom. "You cannot evict us from that estate, Sydney. You think you are so incredibly smart with your forensic accounting and your corporate takeovers, but you forgot one crucial detail." He takes another stumbling step forward, looking completely unhinged. "You do not hold all the cards," he sneers, his chest heaving with desperate exertion. "I have a trump card that will stop this entire hostile takeover dead in its tracks. You need to read the fine print on the company charter." The short, balding man, wearing a severely tailored gray suit, steps out from behind a marble pillar. It is Arthur, his ruthless corporate lawyer, who has spent the last 2 decades burying my father's terrible business mistakes under mountains of aggressive legal paperwork. Arthur looks incredibly nervous, sweating under the harsh chandelier lights, but he dutifully scurries down the center aisle, holding a thick leather briefcase tightly against his chest. The remaining high society guests who have not already fled the room watch in stunned silence as the panicked lawyer scurries up to the absolute edge of the wooden stage. He clicks open the brass locks on his expensive briefcase with trembling hands. Reginald practically snatches a yellowed piece of thick legal paper directly out of the lawyer's trembling grip. My father holds the aged document high above his head, as if it is some kind of magical holy relic that will suddenly save him from absolute ruin. His chest is heaving violently under his ruined tuxedo shirt, and his eyes are wide with a terrifying manic glee. He looks completely deranged, standing there clutching 30-year-old stationery while federal agents secure the perimeter of the ballroom. He snaps the paper tight and begins reading the dense legal jargon out loud to the entire room. His voice booms across the silent space, dripping with pure malicious vindication. The document is the original corporate charter from the founding of his logistics holding company decades ago. Reginald reads the specific clause outlining family resources and corporate ownership. The archaic legal text explicitly states that any external business venture created by a direct family member utilizing any family resources legally belongs 50% to his primary holding company. He reads the words 50% twice, just to make sure every single person in the room understands his claim. He lowers the paper and points a thick, trembling finger directly at my face. A sickeningly triumphant smirk spreads across his purple, sweating features. He truly believes he has just found the ultimate loophole to completely destroy my life and save his own sinking ship. "You really thought you were so incredibly smart, Sydney?" Reginald sneers, his voice echoing harshly off the velvet curtains. "You thought you could just waltz in here with your federal agents and your fancy forensic accounting and take my beautiful estate. But you forgot where you came from. You forgot who gave you the exact tools you needed to build your precious little empire. He takes a heavy, stumbling step toward me, crushing discarded cocktail napkins under his expensive leather shoes. He loudly reminds me of a cold, rainy night exactly 10 years ago. It was the exact same night Yvonne had violently thrown me out of the house for demanding my college savings. He reminds the entire silent ballroom that before I walked out into the pouring rain, I had begged him for a tiny fraction of the money they had stolen from me. I had begged him for just enough to survive. He proudly announces that he gave me a pathetic $5,000 personal check to buy my very first computer server. He reminds me that he made me sign a handwritten receipt for that miserable $5,000 just so he could prove he was a generous father. Because of that single $5,000 loan, Reginald screams, his face turning an even darker shade of violent red. I provided the initial family resources that built your entire company. I have the signed receipt right here in Arthur's briefcase. That means my holding company legally owns exactly one half of Vanguard Cybernetics. I own half of your billions, Sydney. I own half of your classified federal contracts. I own half of your proprietary technology. He throws his head back and lets out a loud, booming laugh that sounds completely unhinged. The sound bounces off the high ceilings, making the remaining church ladies shiver in their expensive seats. Reginald lowers his head and glares at me with pure, unadulterated greed shining in his dark eyes. He proudly announces his immediate plan to forcefully liquidate my entire company. He tells the stunned crowd that he will legally sell off all my corporate assets tomorrow morning. He will dismantle my life's work piece by piece, just to save his failing logistics empire and pay off the massive, staggering debts that Spencer and Dominique left behind. He actually smiles at me, completely stripped of his pride, but wrapped entirely in his own arrogant delusions. He tells me I am nothing but a foolish little girl who played a dangerous game and lost everything to a seasoned corporate titan. I do not flinch. I do not take a single step backward. I just stand there perfectly still on the polished wooden stage, looking at this pathetic, desperate man clutching a yellowed piece of paper. I look at his sweating face and his wild, greedy eyes, and I feel absolutely nothing but a deep, profound pity for how incredibly blind he truly is. He is standing in the absolute center of a massive federal crime scene, surrounded by elite tactical officers, and he thinks a 30-year-old corporate charter is going to save him from reality. I slowly turn my head to the side and give a very small, deliberate nod to the lead federal agent standing near the stage stairs. The tall, imposing agent immediately steps forward. He does not reach for his steel handcuffs. He does not unholster his weapon. Instead, he reaches his large hand deep inside his dark, tactical windbreaker. He pulls out a massive, thick manila folder that is entirely bulging with hundreds of heavily redacted documents. The thick brown folder is prominently stamped with the dark, intimidating official seal of the Internal Revenue Service. The federal agent walks directly up to the edge of the stage. He reaches up and shoves the heavy IRS folder aggressively against my father's chest, physically forcing Reginald to drop the yellowed corporate charter and grab the thick file before it falls to the floor. Reginald stares down at the terrifying government seal on the heavy folder, and his triumphant smirk completely vanishes. His heavy breathing stops entirely. I look him dead in the eyes with absolute freezing detachment. Claiming 50% ownership of my company is the absolute worst mistake you could have possibly made, Reginald. I say, my voice perfectly calm and completely merciless. Because if you own half of my business, that means you are legally responsible for the surprise inside that folder. The heavy silence in the grand ballroom is completely suffocating as my father slowly opens the thick manila folder. His arrogant swagger has entirely evaporated, leaving only a terrified old man standing under the harsh chandelier lights. His thick fingers are trembling so violently that the crisp white IRS documents inside the folder rattle against each other. He pulls out the first stack of papers, and his eyes dart wildly across the complex financial ledgers and the bold red government warnings printed across the top of every single page. The sheer volume of the documentation proves that my forensic accounting team has been working directly with federal tax authorities for months, building an absolutely inescapable trap. Arthur, the ruthless corporate lawyer, leans over my father's shoulder to look at the documents. The short, balding man squints at the papers, and I watch the exact moment his legal brain processes the catastrophic reality of the situation. All the color drains completely from Arthur's face, leaving him looking like a ghost in a tailored gray suit. He takes a very quick, involuntary step backward, physically distancing himself from Reginald and the toxic documents. "You see, Dad," I say into the microphone, my voice echoing clearly across the empty tables and the stunned remaining guests. "When you build a global technology empire, you generate a massive amount of revenue. Vanguard Cybernetics is not a little startup anymore. We hold classified federal defense contracts, and we generate billions of dollars in annual profit. For the past 10 years, I have meticulously reported every single cent of my income to the federal government. I have paid my taxes perfectly. But if you are holding that 30-year-old corporate charter and publicly declaring that your logistics holding company owns exactly 50% of my business, then we have a very serious legal problem." Reginald stares at me, his mouth opening and closing wordlessly like a suffocating fish. He looks down at the yellowed charter in his left hand and the heavy IRS file in his right hand, finally understanding the absolute nightmare he just walked into. "If your company owns half of Vanguard Cybernetics," I continue, taking another slow, deliberate step toward him, "that means your holding company has been legally entitled to half of my profits for the last 10 years. But you never declared those assets on your corporate tax returns, did you? You never reported the massive equity you supposedly held in my technology firm. You never paid a single dime of taxes on the hundreds of millions of dollars in corporate value that you now claim legally belongs to you." The federal agents standing on the stage shift their weight, watching my father with intense professional scrutiny. They already know exactly what is in the folder. They are simply waiting for him to make his final choice. By invoking that ridiculous family resources clause, you are actively confessing to a decade of massive corporate tax evasion, I announce, projecting my voice so the wealthy country club women hovering near the exits can hear every single word. You are telling the federal government that you intentionally hid a multi-billion-dollar asset in a fraudulent attempt to evade corporate taxes. The documents you are holding outline the exact penalty for that level of historical tax fraud. Reginald looks down at the final page of the IRS assessment, and a strangled wheezing sound escapes from his throat. His entire body begins to sway under the crushing weight of the numbers printed on the page. "If you claim you own half my company," I say, my voice dropping to a deadly serious whisper that cuts through the silent ballroom, "you owe the Internal Revenue Service exactly $45 million in back taxes and federal penalties. And because you deliberately hid the asset, the government will treat it as intentional criminal fraud. You will lose your supply chain company, you will lose every single remaining asset you possess, and you will spend the rest of your natural life rotting in a federal penitentiary right alongside your beloved son-in-law Spencer." I stop walking and stand just a few feet away from his trembling form. I look him dead in the eyes, challenging the toxic, arrogant patriarch who threw me out into the rain 10 years ago. "So claim it, Dad," I say, pointing directly at the yellowed corporate charter in his shaking hand. "Claim your 50% ownership. Claim it right now in front of the federal agents. Tell them you own half of my company so they can arrest you for $45 million in tax evasion. Take your precious trump card and play it." Reginald is completely paralyzed. The wild, manic gleam in his eyes has been replaced by absolute, pure terror. He looks at the federal agents who are staring back at him with cold, calculating expressions. He looks down at Yvonne, who is still weeping pathetically on the carpeted stage, completely unable to help him. He is entirely trapped in a brilliant, inescapable checkmate. If he drops his claim, he loses the family estate to me and walks away with absolutely nothing. If he enforces his claim to take my money, he immediately inherits a $45 million federal tax debt that will put him behind bars forever. He turns his head slowly, looking for his ruthless lawyer. "Arthur, do something," Reginald pleads, his voice cracking into a desperate, pathetic whine. "Find a loophole. Tell them the charter invalidates the tax penalty. Do your job and fix this nightmare right now." Arthur stands frozen near the edge of the stage, clutching his expensive leather briefcase against his chest. The lawyer looks at the federal agents and then looks at the massive IRS folder in my father's hands. Arthur knows exactly how aggressive federal prosecutors can be when dealing with massive corporate fraud. He knows that if he argues in favor of this 30-year-old charter, he will be actively participating in a massive tax evasion scheme, and he will lose his license and go to prison alongside his arrogant client. Arthur vigorously shakes his head, backing away toward the stage stairs. His face is slick with nervous sweat, and he is breathing heavily. "I cannot do that." Reginald, the lawyer, stammers, his voice shaking with absolute panic. "I will not be a party to intentional federal tax fraud. I did not know about the technology firm Equity, and I will not represent you in this suicidal claim." Reginald reaches out a trembling hand toward his longtime legal counsel. "Arthur, you cannot leave me," he begs, his toxic pride completely shattered. "You work for me." "Not anymore," Arthur shouts, taking another quick step backward down the wooden stairs. He holds his briefcase up like a shield against the incoming destruction. "I withdraw as your legal counsel," he declares loudly, ensuring the federal agents hear his official statement. "I am officially withdrawing from all your corporate and personal accounts effective immediately. You are completely on your own, Reginald." The lawyer turns around and practically runs down the center aisle of the ballroom, pushing past the shocked, lingering guests in his desperate, frantic rush to escape the burning wreckage of my father's empire. The heavy ballroom doors swing shut behind the fleeing attorney, echoing with a loud, booming thud that signals the absolute end of the line. Reginald watches his only remaining ally abandon him to the wolves. The last remaining shred of his arrogant defiance crumbles into dust. The 30-year-old corporate charter slips from his trembling fingers and flutters uselessly to the floor, landing right next to Yvonne's ruined silver dress. The massive IRS folder slips from his other hand, spilling the devastating financial documents across the polished wooden stage. Reginald lets out a hollow, broken gasp, and his knees buckle beneath him. He physically collapses into a velvet-upholstered chair near the audiovisual table, completely destroyed and entirely defeated by the daughter he threw away. The heavy ballroom doors are still vibrating from the lawyer making his frantic escape. Reginald is slumped in the velvet chair, completely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of his financial ruin. His chest barely rises and falls as he stares blankly at the scattered federal tax documents covering the polished wooden stage. He looks absolutely ancient and entirely broken. Yvonne remains crumpled on the carpet a few feet away, completely lost in her own pathetic, hysterical weeping. The federal agents do not give them a single ounce of pity. Two heavily armed tactical officers step forward and finally drag a cursing, sweating Spencer toward the main exit. His expensive designer shoes drag uselessly across the floor as they haul him away to face his federal indictments and decades of prison time. The heavy wooden doors slam shut behind him, sealing his fate forever. I watch the entire toxic empire finally crumble into ash and dust. My parents have been completely neutralized and stripped of every single asset and ounce of dignity they possessed. But there is still one person left standing in the wreckage. I turn my head and look toward the center of the ballroom. Dominique is standing completely alone near a deserted dining table. She has just watched her wealthy husband get dragged out by federal agents, and she has watched her powerful parents lose their entire fortune and their massive estate in a matter of minutes. Her fake, perfect world has been entirely obliterated. I expect her to collapse onto the floor just like our mother, or to scream and fight just like our father. But Dominique does something far more disturbing and incredibly calculated. I watch in absolute disgust as Dominique takes a deep breath and forces her facial features to completely relax. She reaches up with trembling hands and carefully wipes the dark, smeared makeup away from her eyes. She smooths the front of her expensive silk evening gown and violently pushes her perfectly styled blonde hair back over her shoulders. A chilling, artificial smile slowly stretches across her pale face. It is the exact same practiced empty smile she uses when she wants something expensive from our parents. She steps away from the abandoned dining table and begins walking slowly toward the stage. Her high heels click sharply against the hardwood floor, echoing through the silent room. She completely ignores her weeping mother on the floor and steps right over the scattered tax documents without even glancing at her ruined father. She does not care about them at all now that their bank accounts are completely empty. Dominique stops right at the edge of the stage, looking up at me with wide, shimmering, innocent eyes. She clasps her hands together in front of her chest, playing the role of the sweet, helpless victim to absolute perfection. "Sydney," she says, her voice dripping with a sickening manufactured warmth. "I am so incredibly proud of you. I always knew you were the smart one in the family. You really showed them the truth today. They completely deserved everything you just did to them. They were always so terrible to you, and I hated watching it happen." I stare down at her, feeling a deep wave of pure revulsion washing over my entire body. She is perfectly willing to step on the absolute ashes of her own parents just to save her own skin. Dominique takes a step up onto the stage, reaching her hands out toward me, as if we are the closest friends in the entire world. "We can rebuild everything, Sydney." She begs, her voice taking on a desperate pleading tone. "Just you and me. We are sisters. We share the same blood, and we are the only ones left. We do not need mom and dad anymore. They were always holding us back anyway. Just let me move into the Oak Bluffs property with you. Just give me a small suite until I get back on my feet and figure things out. We can be a real family now, just the two of us ruling the city together." The sheer monumental audacity of her request hangs heavily in the bright stage lights. She genuinely believes she can simply flip a switch and erase decades of psychological torture with a fake smile and the word sister. A short, sharp laugh escapes my throat. The sound is completely devoid of humor, and it cuts through her manufactured sweetness like a jagged blade. I look down at her outstretched hands and step backward, refusing to let her toxic skin brush against my clothing. "We are not sisters, Dominique." I state, my voice carrying absolute freezing authority. "We have never been sisters. You made that perfectly clear a very long time ago. Do you remember my high school graduation? Because I remember every single second of it with crystal clarity." Dominique lowers her hands, and her fake smile begins to twitch at the corners. She knows exactly what memory I am dragging out into the light, and she desperately wants to hide from it. "I stood in the corner of the country club ballroom holding my honors diploma," I say, staring directly into her panicked eyes. "I was wearing a cheap clearance rack dress because mom refused to buy me anything new. You walked right up to me with your group of incredibly wealthy, arrogant friends. You looked me up and down with pure, absolute disgust. You called me socially unfit right to my face. You laughed at my cheap clothes, and you proudly told your rich friends that I was not related to you at all. You told them I was just the hired help brought in to serve their drinks and clear their empty plates. You humiliated me in front of the entire room just to make yourself feel superior, and you smiled while you did it." Dominique opens her mouth to speak, offering some pathetic, frantic excuse, but I immediately cut her off. "You spent your entire life treating me like garbage just because I did not fit into your twisted, pathetic social climbing agenda." I continue, my voice rising with righteous finality. "You gladly participated in every single lie and every single cruelty this family ever inflicted on me. You are just as guilty and just as rotten as the parents you are currently stepping over. You are not moving into my estate, Dominique. You are not getting a single dime of my money. You are going to walk out of this hotel with absolutely nothing, and you are going to face the harsh, unforgiving reality of the real world entirely on your own." The total rejection hits Dominique with the force of a speeding train. The sweet, innocent victim mask completely shatters, revealing the ugly, spoiled monster lurking underneath. Her face contorts into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. The realization that she has absolutely zero charm and zero leverage over me completely breaks her fragile reality. She looks around the empty ballroom, realizing that there is no one left to manipulate, and no one left to save her from the consequences of her own terrible choices. She is entirely destitute. Something dark and violent snaps deep inside her brain. She lets out a shrill, ear-piercing scream of pure, absolute rage. It is the sound of a spoiled child being told no for the very first time in her entire miserable life. She spins around wildly, her eyes darting across the abandoned dining tables nearest to the stage. She spots a heavy silver steak knife resting next to an uneaten plate of expensive food. Dominique lunges off the stage and grabs the thick wooden handle of the steak knife with white-knuckled force. She turns back toward me, her eyes wide and completely feral. She raises the sharp, jagged blade high above her head, letting out another guttural scream, and she charges directly at me, in a blind, murderous rage. Dominique lunges off the edge of the stage, but she does not even make it 2 full steps before the harsh reality of the room violently crashes down on her. The elite federal agents, who have been standing by observing the entire chaotic scene, react with terrifying synchronized speed. A massive tactical officer steps directly into her path. He does not even bother to draw a weapon or issue a verbal warning. He simply lowers his shoulder and hits my charging sister with the full, devastating force of a freight train. Dominique slams hard into the polished wooden floor, her breath leaving her lungs in a loud, ragged gasp. The heavy silver steak knife goes skittering harmlessly across the room and clatters against the base of a cold marble pillar. The sharp, ringing sound of the metal blade hitting stone echoes brightly through the massive, empty ballroom. The tactical officer flips Dominique over roughly and pins her face down against the cold hardwood floor. Another agent rushes forward, immediately pulling a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his dark tactical belt. Dominique screams in absolute shock as her arms are wrenched painfully behind her back, the loud metallic clicking of the handcuffs locking tightly around her thin, delicate wrists cuts through the stagnant air. She thrashes wildly, kicking her expensive designer heels against the floor, but the officers hold her down with practiced, effortless authority. The elegant church ladies who were lingering near the exit doors let out synchronized gasps of pure aristocratic horror. They watch the beautiful, perfect socialite writhing on the ground like a common criminal, and they quickly turn away, rushing out of the hotel to spread the scandalous news to the rest of the city. At the very back of the room, the agents holding Spencer pause for a brief moment to watch his wife get tackled to the ground. Spencer watches Dominique screaming and struggling, and his handsome face twists into a mask of pure, pathetic defeat. He truly thought he was an untouchable mastermind. He spent years secretly siphoning money out of grandmother's accounts to fund his secret double life with his pregnant mistress. But now he is being hauled away to a federal penitentiary for massive wire fraud and systematic elder abuse. He stole millions from a sick elderly woman, and now he will spend the rest of his natural life paying for that ultimate, unforgivable betrayal. The officers shove him through the heavy wooden doors, and he disappears from my life entirely, leaving a trail of absolute ruin in his wake. The federal agent hauls Dominique up to her feet. Her beautiful silk evening gown is completely ruined and torn at the seams. Her face is a terrible, messy smear of angry tears and raw, red hatred. She violently struggles against the iron grip of the federal officers, twisting her body to look at me one last time. I was the golden child, Dominique screams at the top of her lungs, her voice cracking with pure, absolute hysteria. I was the one they loved. I was supposed to be the successful one, Sydney. You were supposed to be nothing. You were supposed to be the absolute failure of the family. How did you do this to me? I played by all their rules. I married the right man and I threw the right parties. I am the perfect daughter. I walk slowly to the absolute edge of the wooden stage and look down at her thrashing, pathetic form. She looks entirely broken, completely stripped of every single social advantage she ever possessed. She thought her pretty face and her cruel manipulations would protect her forever, but those things are entirely useless against federal indictments and forensic audits. You are never perfect, Dominique. I say, my voice completely quiet, but carrying perfectly through the silent tension of the room. You were just a highly expensive product. Mom and Dad bought you the right clothes, and they bought you the right friends, and they bought you the right husband, but none of it was ever real. You spent your entire life polishing an empty shell. You were just the illusion, Dominique. I continue staring directly into her wild, desperate eyes. I am the reality. Dominique lets out another piercing, agonizing scream, but the tactical officers do not give her another second to throw her miserable tantrum. They march her forcefully down the center aisle of the ballroom, pulling her toward the exit. She continues to kick and scream, shouting terrible curses at me and begging our father to save her from the agents. But Reginald does not even look up. He does not even turn his head. He is still slumped deep in his velvet-upholstered chair, staring blankly at the massive pile of federal tax documents scattered across the stage. He is completely paralyzed by his catastrophic $45 million tax bill. He watches his precious golden daughter get dragged away for attempted assault and massive federal conspiracy, and he does not lift a single trembling finger to help her. He has absolutely nothing left to offer. He is a broken, defeated old man who played a foolish game of corporate warfare and lost everything to the daughter he discarded. The heavy oak doors finally open, and the officers drag Dominique out of the ballroom, leaving a trail of absolute heavy silence in her wake. The grand ballroom is now entirely quiet except for the ragged, shallow breathing of my defeated father. I stand alone on the brightly lit stage and look out over the burning, smoldering wreckage of my family. The massive empire they built on cruelty, theft, and endless manipulation has been completely dismantled in less than an hour. I have exposed every single lie and I have won everything. But out of the corner of my eye, I notice a sudden subtle movement near the dark service corridor. I turn my head slightly, keeping my posture perfectly still. Yvonne has stopped crying. She is no longer wailing and begging for mercy at the front of the stage. Instead, she has quietly pushed herself up from the carpet and is crawling desperately toward the thick velvet curtains that cover the back kitchen exit. She has taken off her ruined designer heels to move more quietly. Her stained silver dress drags silently across the polished floor as she tries to slip away into the shadows, hoping I have entirely forgotten about her. The heavy velvet curtains that separate the grand ballroom from the dark kitchen corridor are just a few feet away. Yvonne reaches them, panting heavily, her hands covered in dust from crawling across the floorboards. She thinks she has successfully outsmarted everyone in the room. While the federal agents were busy tackling Dominique to the ground and dragging Spencer out the front doors, my mother used the chaotic distraction to secure her own quiet escape. She reaches behind the thick fabric of the curtains and pulls out a massive, bulging leather tote bag that she must have hidden there hours ago. She clutches the heavy bag tightly against her chest, her eyes darting back and forth in the shadows like a cornered rat. A sickening smile of relief begins to form on her tear-stained face as she turns toward the exit doors. Before she can take a single step forward, a thick, polished mahogany cane slams violently down onto the floorboards directly in front of her feet. The sharp cracking sound echoes like a gunshot in the quiet corner of the room. Yvonne gasps and stumbles backward, dropping her ruined silver heels. Standing perfectly still in the shadows, blocking the only exit, is my grandmother Josephine. She has been watching this entire catastrophic evening unfold in absolute silence. Her posture is incredibly straight, and her eyes are completely devoid of any warmth or mercy. Josephine is the true matriarch of this family, and she looks down at the pathetic, shivering woman cowering in front of her with absolute freezing contempt. "Stand up, Yvonne!" My grandmother commands, her voice resonating with a quiet, terrifying authority. "Get up off the floor and stop crawling around in the dark like a common thief." Yvonne scrambles to her feet, her entire body shaking uncontrollably. She hugs the oversized leather bag even tighter against her chest, trying to hide it behind her arms. "Josephine, please, you have to let me go," Yvonne whispers, her voice cracking with desperate panic. "Sydney has gone completely crazy. She brought federal agents here, and she ruined the entire evening. We have to get out of here before she destroys everything." My grandmother does not move a single muscle. She simply stares at the bulging leather bag clutched in Yvonne's sweating hands. "What exactly do you have in that bag, Yvonne?" she asks, ignoring the frantic, pathetic excuses completely. "It is nothing," Yvonne stammers, taking another step backward until her spine hits the cold wall. "It is just my makeup and my personal medication. I need my medication, Josephine. Please just let me pass." "You have been a terrible liar since the very first day my son brought you into this house," Josephine says, her voice dripping with absolute disgust. Before Yvonne can formulate another pathetic excuse, my grandmother raises her heavy mahogany cane. With one swift, incredibly precise motion, Josephine hooks the sharp brass handle of her cane directly into the zipper of the heavy leather tote bag. She gives it a violent downward yank. The metal zipper tears open instantly, and the heavy bag is ripped right out of Yvonne's trembling grip. The bag hits the hardwood floor and spills its hidden contents everywhere. It is not makeup. It is not medication. It is a massive glittering fortune of vintage family heirlooms. Dozens of priceless antique pieces scatter across the floorboards, catching the dim light. There are heavy diamond necklaces that belong in a museum vault. There are thick emerald rings and vintage gold watches. There is a flawless sapphire choker that has been in our family for 4 generations. While her husband was suffering a complete mental collapse over massive federal tax evasion, and while her daughter was being arrested for attempted assault, my mother was quietly looting the family estate. She was stuffing millions of dollars worth of irreplaceable family history into a cheap leather bag so she could pawn it all and maintain her pathetic, luxurious lifestyle. Yvonne stares down at the scattered diamonds and lets out a horrified whimpering sound. She falls to her knees and desperately tries to scoop the jewels back into the torn bag. "Leave them on the floor," Josephine commands, slamming her cane down just inches from Yvonne's grasping fingers. "Do not dare touch my family's legacy with your greedy hands." Yvonne freezes, completely terrified to move. She looks up at my grandmother with fresh tears streaming down her ruined face. "Please, Josephine," she begs, openly sobbing now. "I need something to survive. Sydney is taking the estate, and Reginald has completely lost the company. I will be out on the street. I have absolutely nothing." Josephine looks down at the weeping woman, and there is not a single ounce of pity in her ancient eyes. "You spent 32 years treating my granddaughter like absolute trash," Josephine says, her voice ringing with powerful, ultimate justice. "You belittled Sydney every single day of her life. You ignored her brilliant mind and you crushed her spirit just because she did not care about your shallow, pathetic social clubs. You worshipped a foolish golden child who just tried to murder her own sister, and you ignored the only person in this family who actually possessed any real character or integrity." My grandmother takes a slow, deliberate step forward, forcing Yvonne to cower back against the velvet curtains. "You thought you could just rob this estate blind and walk away to start a new, comfortable life?" Josephine continues, pointing her cane directly at Yvonne's face. "But that is not how this story ends. I am taking back my jewels, and I am taking back my family's legacy. You are going to walk out of those doors right now, and you are going to leave with exactly what you brought into this family." Josephine pauses, letting the absolute freezing reality of her words sink in. "Nothing," she states with final, crushing authority. "You leave with absolutely nothing." Yvonne lets out a devastated, wailing cry. She is completely stripped of her stolen wealth and completely ostracized from the only world she has ever cared about. She slowly pulls herself up from the floor, leaving the glittering diamonds behind. She does not look at me, and she does not look at my grandmother. She pushes through the heavy doors and walks out into the cold, dark night, completely empty-handed and entirely alone. I watch her disappear into the shadows, feeling a profound sense of closure. The toxic matriarch has been entirely banished. I slowly turn my attention back to the center of the brightly lit stage. Reginald has been sitting in the velvet chair watching his wife get stripped of her stolen loot and banished into the streets. He looks around the massive empty ballroom, realizing that every single person he ever commanded is entirely gone. His lawyers have fled. His son-in-law is in federal custody. His golden daughter is facing prison time. His wife has abandoned him. He slowly stands up on shaking, unsteady legs. He looks down at the IRS documents scattered around his expensive shoes, and then he looks across the room at me. His arrogant pride is completely gone, replaced by the terrified, pathetic reality of an old man who has absolutely nowhere left to run. "Sydney," my father whispers, his voice cracking with pure, desperate fear as he begs me one last time. "Where are we supposed to go? We have nothing left." The sound of my father's cracking, desperate voice hangs heavily in the stale air of the ruined ballroom. His pathetic plea echoes off the high vaulted ceilings and bounces against the cold marble pillars. I look down at the man who spent his entire life building a massive toxic kingdom on the broken backs of his own children. He is trembling so violently that his expensive tailored trousers are pooling around his luxury leather shoes. Those are shoes he will absolutely never be able to afford again. I look at his sweating forehead and his pleading, hollow eyes. For 32 years of my life, I craved his approval more than oxygen. For 32 years, I would have done absolutely anything to hear him simply say he was proud of me. I would have sacrificed my own happiness just to earn a single genuine smile from this tyrannical man. But standing here right now, looking at the absolute smoking wreckage of my toxic family, I feel absolutely nothing. There is no sympathy blooming in my chest. There is no lingering guilt gnawing at my conscience. There is no sadness for the empire that just burned to the ground. There is only a massive, profound sense of total and complete closure. I slowly turn my head and survey the enormous silent room. The shattered remains of the Vanguard legacy are scattered everywhere like garbage. My mother has vanished into the dark alleyways, clutching absolutely nothing but the clothes on her back. My golden sister is currently sitting in the back of a federal tactical vehicle wrapped in cold steel handcuffs, facing decades in prison. My brother-in-law is already being processed for massive wire fraud and elder abuse. And the great Reginald Vanguard, the terrifying patriarch who ruled this city with an iron fist, is sitting in a velvet chair begging the daughter he threw away for a safe place to sleep. The irony is so incredibly thick and perfect that it feels like a physical heavy weight settling over the brightly lit stage. I slowly step forward until I am standing right over him. My shadow falls completely across his trembling, sweating face. "Do you remember the night you threw me out, Reginald?" I ask, my voice perfectly calm and completely merciless. "Do you remember how hard it was freezing and raining when you locked the heavy front doors of this exact estate and told me I was no longer your daughter? I had absolutely nothing that night. I had no money and no shelter and no family to protect me. I was terrified and I was freezing, and I begged you to just let me stay one more single night until the storm passed. You looked at me with pure disgust, and you told me that failure was a contagious disease. You refused to let me infect your perfect wealthy house. You told me to figure it out on my own because the real world does not hand out free favors to useless little girls who cannot pull their own weight." Reginald opens his mouth, a fresh wave of tears spilling over his deeply wrinkled cheeks, but I do not let him interrupt. I survived out there. I tell him the absolute truth, ringing clearly across the silent ballroom. I built a massive global empire with my bare hands, while you sat in your comfortable leather chair and slowly destroyed yours through greed and illegal manipulation. You drained every single family account, and you leveraged every single corporate asset just to pretend you were still a powerful king. But the crown is completely gone now. You played a very dangerous game of corporate warfare with me, and you lost every single piece on the board. You ask me where you are supposed to go now. I continue looking down at his pathetic, weeping form. I allow a cold, completely empty smile to finally touch my lips. You can go to the homeless shelter I donated to last year. I say, my words slicing through the quiet air like pieces of frozen glass. It is a very nice facility, located right in the middle of the downtown district. I built a brand new state-of-the-art cafeteria for them, using the exact technology profits you just tried to steal from me. I hear their hot soup is excellent. They serve it every single evening at 6 o'clock sharp. You will have to stand in line in the freezing cold, just like everyone else you ever looked down upon. You will have to wait your turn with the people you called lazy and worthless. But they will give you a warm bowl of food and a clean cot to sleep on, and they will not ask you for a 30-year-old corporate charter to prove you belong there. Reginald lets out a devastating broken sob, burying his face entirely in his trembling hands. His whole body shakes with the crushing, horrific reality of his new destitute life. He is going to be a penniless, disgraced old man sleeping in a public shelter funded entirely by the daughter he completely despised. I look at him crying uncontrollably in the velvet chair, and I realize the toxic heavy cord that has tied me to this abusive family for my entire life has finally been completely severed. I owe them absolutely nothing. I have taken back my dignity, and I have taken back my future. I slowly turn my back on him, completely cutting off his existence from my reality forever. I look toward the federal agent standing at the base of the wooden stage. The lead tactical agent gives me a small, respectful nod and immediately signals his heavily armed team. The police officers officially move in to clear the room once and for all. They grab Reginald tightly by his arms and haul him roughly out of the velvet chair, forcing him to walk toward the heavy oak doors. He stumbles and drags his feet, weeping openly, as the agents march him out of his own ballroom forever. I stand perfectly still on the center of the stage, watching him disappear into the night. The elite high society guests who stayed to watch the spectacle are huddled closely near the edges of the room. These are the exact same wealthy, arrogant snobs who used to whisper cruel rumors about me and laugh at my cheap clothes. Now they are staring up at me in pure, absolute awe. Their eyes are wide with a sudden, terrifying, newfound respect. They just watched me dismantle the most powerful family in the city without breaking a single sweat. I smooth the front of my tailored jacket and look out over my new kingdom as the heavy doors slam shut behind my father, leaving me alone in the absolute silence of my ultimate victory. Sydney. My father whispers, his voice cracking with pure, desperate fear as he begs me one last time. Where are we supposed to go? We have nothing left. I stand perfectly still on the edge of the elevated wooden stage, and I look down into the weeping, pathetic eyes of the man who tormented me for my entire existence. I listen to the heavy, desperate silence of the grand ballroom, and I search the very deepest corners of my soul for even a single microscopic drop of sympathy. For 32 years, I chased this man, seeking his approval like a starving animal begging for scraps at a banquet table. I spent my entire childhood twisting myself into agonizing shapes, just trying to be worthy of his terrible conditional love. I endured his freezing contempt and his brutal punishments, believing that somehow I was inherently broken and defective. But looking at him right now, slouched in that velvet chair, with his expensive tailored trousers pooling around his trembling ankles, I realized the absolute beautiful truth. I was never broken. He was simply a weak, cowardly tyrant who used cruelty to mask his own pathetic incompetence. I feel the heavy iron chains of my childhood trauma snap and shatter completely. The toxic cord that has kept me bound to this miserable family is permanently severed. There is absolutely no sympathy left inside my heart. There is only a massive, profound sense of ultimate closure. I slowly turn my head, and I survey the absolute smoldering wreckage of the family empire. The physical destruction of their legacy is scattered completely across the polished hardwood floors of the ballroom. There are thousands of pages of damning forensic audit reports mixed with the shattered glass of dropped champagne flutes. There are heavy steel handcuffs waiting in the dark, and there are federal agents standing over the broken remains of a dynasty built entirely on theft and deception. My mother is wandering out in the freezing night, stripped of her stolen jewels and completely banished from high society. My sister is sitting in the back of a tactical transport vehicle, weeping over her ruined designer gown and her completely destroyed future. My brother-in-law is locked in a federal holding cell, facing the rest of his natural life behind thick iron bars. They thought their money made them untouchable gods, but now they are absolutely nothing. I look back down at Reginald, the great patriarch who orchestrated all of this misery, and I prepare to address him for the very last time in my life. You ask me where you are supposed to go, Reginald, I say, my voice echoing through the massive silent room with total terrifying calm. I do not call him father because he permanently lost the right to that title the night he threw me out into the freezing rain. Do you remember the night you permanently banished me from this exact estate? Do you remember how I begged you for a warm place to sleep, just for one single night, because I had absolutely no money and nowhere else to go? You stood in the grand foyer of this massive mansion And you looked at me with pure, unadulterated disgust. You told me that failure was a contagious disease, and you refused to let me infect your perfect wealthy home. You told me that the real world does not hand out free favors to useless little girls who cannot pull their own weight. You locked the heavy iron gates and you left me out in the freezing storm, fully expecting me to fail and vanish into obscurity. Reginald lets out a terrible, ragged sob and buries his sweating face in his trembling hands. His shoulders shake violently as the crushing reality of his total defeat crashes down upon him, but I do not stop speaking. I survived out there in the cold. I tell him my words, slicing through the stagnant air like shards of freezing ice. I built a massive global enterprise with my bare hands while you sat in your comfortable leather chair and slowly destroyed yours through greed and pathetic illegal manipulation. You drained every single family account, and you leveraged every corporate asset just to pretend you were still a powerful king. But your crown was always a cheap illusion, Reginald. You played a very dangerous game of corporate warfare with the daughter you threw away, and you lost every single piece on the board. You owe millions to the federal government, and you will never see the inside of a boardroom ever again. I take a slow, deliberate step forward until my shadow falls completely across his weeping form. You have absolutely nothing left, because you are exactly what you always accused me of being, I say, staring directly into his terrified, hollow eyes. You are a failure. But I am not a monster, Reginald. I am not going to leave you completely stranded without a single piece of helpful advice. I pause and let a cold, empty smile finally touch my lips. You can go to the homeless shelter I donated to last year, I tell him with absolute freezing authority. I built a brand new state-of-the-art cafeteria for them, using the exact technology profits you just tried to steal from me. I hear their soup is excellent. Reginald gasps as if all the oxygen has been violently punched right out of his lungs. He realizes with absolute horror that he is going to be a penniless, disgraced old man sleeping on a public cot, funded entirely by the charity of the daughter he completely despised. He reaches a shaking, desperate hand toward my shoe, begging for mercy, but I do not give him another second of my time. I turn my back on him completely. I pivot on my heels and walk away, cutting the toxic cord forever. The heavy weight I have carried for 32 years magically lifts off my shoulders, and I feel lighter than air. The lead federal tactical agent gives me a brief, respectful nod and immediately signals his heavily armed team. The police officers aggressively move in to officially clear the room. They grab Reginald tightly by his expensive suit jacket and haul him roughly out of the velvet chair. He stumbles and drags his feet, weeping openly, as the agents march him forcefully down the center aisle of the ballroom. The heavy oak doors open, and the officers drag the broken patriarch out into the dark, freezing night, throwing him out of his own estate forever. The grand ballroom is now completely cleared of the toxic parasites. I stand perfectly still on the brightly lit stage and look out over the remaining crowd. The elite high society guests who stayed to watch the spectacle are huddled closely near the edges of the room. These are the exact same wealthy, arrogant snobs who used to whisper cruel rumors about me and laugh at my cheap clothes. Now they are completely silent. They bow to whoever holds the most absolute, ruthless power, and tonight they just watched me execute the most flawless hostile takeover in the history of this city. They stare up at me in pure, absolute awe. Their eyes are wide with a sudden, terrifying, newfound respect as they finally realize I am the new, undisputed queen of their world.